Welcome to the February 4, 2025 City Council Special Hybrid Meeting to hold the annual City Council Planning Session. I'm Mayor Salim Neese. Today's hybrid City Council Planning Session is being brought to you in person and by Zoom. We're also broadcasting on the city's YouTube channel. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Council members, please have your microphones turned on for roll call. City Clerk Andrea Larson, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Andral.
Here.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Here.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Here.
Councilmember Weicker.
Here.
Councilmember Weinberg has not joined us yet. Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Here.
And Mayor Neese.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could stand and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we now move to approval of today's agenda. If there's no questions, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, moved by Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, seconded by Councilmember Jacobson. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Weicker.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg is still absent. Councilmember Reynolds.
Aye.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
Councilmember Andral.
Aye.
And Mayor Neese.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, motion passes. Agenda is approved. And our first item of business is AB 6604, Public Safety and Maintenance Facility Design Workshop. We welcome City Manager Jesse Bond.
Good evening, I guess good afternoon, not evening. I'm trained for council meeting hour. All right, I will ask for staff assistance in retrieving my nameplate I just dumped on the floor. Thanks, Andrea. All right, council, it's an exciting day. We are at meeting number 1 discussing the public safety and maintenance facility. I'll remind you that it was just less than a year ago that you provided us the direction to commence design on this facility. And here we are back at our planning session. So really excited to walk through this with you today. I'm going to start with the background slides. And most of us have been living this intimately, including the city council. But for community members that may be joining us today or watching this video in the future, they may not have all of the history. I don't intend to go over each slide in detail, but just to provide a high-level overview. But the slide deck is complete with all of the history, should anyone need it in the future. Before I dive in, and by the way, this is an interactive presentation, especially as we get into the design discussion. We'll be taking a lot of breaks. We want questions. No question is a bad question. I'll be doing the front half of the presentation and then handing it over to our design team. I should take a moment to introduce the folks that are sitting here at the table. Northwest Studios is our architect team working on the public safety and maintenance facility. Aaron Young and David Cutler, who you've met previously. And to my right is Robbie Cunningham Adams. He is a senior management analyst in the city manager's office, and he's in charge of me and keeping the project on track. All right, shall we dive in? Okay. Again, as I mentioned, we'll spend just a few minutes here, maybe more than a few minutes on the background. We'll talk about the pre-design work that we've done. We'll then dive into the schematic design. And at some point, we're going to clear the tables here and also bring out the big plan sets, because we find that when we're talking design, sometimes it's easier to do so looking at the plans versus the screen. Q&A throughout, so please interrupt me if you have any questions. I'll just remind you, Council, way back in 2021, 2022, you directed us to start working on a long-range facility plan. That was the facility conditions assessment that was keyed up to begin in 2023. We didn't get there, and you all remember that. Had we completed that work, we would have probably been adopting that plan right about now, and it would have set forth a schedule to replace the buildings that are on the list here. We didn't get there, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Diving into City Hall, though, the campus that we're working on today, this is just an aerial shot to remind you and the folks watching from home. The City Hall, the forward parcel, front parcel is about 4 acres. Public Works is just shy of 9 acres. The architect team will be talking more about this site and the site planning as we get into the latter slides. City Hall structures, 2 major facilities on this campus. The City Hall is that dark building that in black that looks like an F. And then the Public Works facilities are shown on the back side. The City Hall building that we are partially replacing with the new Public Safety and Maintenance building is 35,000 square feet. That was the space we occupied. It was our City Hall for nearly 40 years, and that building housed the number of staff that worked in there. It varied, but was anywhere from 80 to 100. Today, if all of the teams were to move back in, it would be right around 93. These are the teams that were housed in the City Hall building. I won't read the list. The other building that we'll be talking about today is the Public Works building. As a reminder, it was constructed in the early 80s for the city maintenance facilities. It's about 15,000 square feet. It's still in operation. It houses a variety of teams, all under the umbrella of Public Works, about 64 year-round employees. And then during the spring and summer months, we add about 20 seasonal employees to that building. I will tell you, over time, the city has repurposed and remodeled that building because we outgrew it pretty quickly. So for those of you that have toured it, you know that some of the maintenance bays are office spaces now, and it isn't quite working for us for a variety of reasons. As I started the presentation, I mentioned that we intended a nice linear phased approach to our building replacement strategies through a facility conditions assessment and a long-range plan. But it was interrupted in 2023 when we closed City Hall due to asbestos contamination. The next set of slides are from a previous presentation. Again, I won't go through them, but I put them in the deck just for continuity. It was in April of 2023 that we discovered some tiles that were broken in the basement of City Hall. We knew the tiles in City Hall were of the vintage that they contained asbestos. So we immediately got to work evaluating the situation and working on an abatement plan. When we brought on our consultant to help, they said, hey, these tiles are right next to an HVAC unit, an air handling unit, and we're gonna need to test inside that HVAC unit to make sure the asbestos fibers did not migrate. At that time, we closed City Hall so that we could do that investigation. For the next several months, and council, you were all involved in this review and discussion. We did a whole lot of testing in partnership with an environmental consulting company. I just want to say this, and I will say it again. Our air quality tests in City Hall were all negative. There was not airborne asbestos. It was primarily in the HVAC unit. In fact, we did a lot of testing, air samples, settled dust, bulk materials, all over the building. And what we found in the end, again, no asbestos fibers identified in any air testing samples. We did have settled dust, asbestos in 11 settled dust samples, mostly inside the HVAC system. And while it doesn't say this on this slide, I'll remind you that our HVAC system in City Hall was of the vintage that it was lined with fiberglass insulation. So as we've all fielded questions about why didn't you just go in and wipe it out, it just wasn't possible to just wipe it out. The whole HVAC system would have needed to be replaced. So what happened? How did the asbestos get inside the HVAC system? We don't know. What we suspect is that there was a construction project in the late 80s or early 90s, possibly a roof project, and the materials that were removed from the roof were asbestos containing, and that may have dislodged some materials that were came in through the air intake on the roof of City Hall. That's our best guess. As you know, council, we decided not to work on this any further. Although we did study it. So it's important to know when we're fielding questions about why replace City Hall. We looked at 2 scenarios to reoccupy City Hall, excuse me. The first was to abate and reoccupy the full building, and the second was to abate and just reoccupy the police wing. When we met with you in 2023 to review these alternatives, we had, these are my words, we stopped estimating. We knew that the full reoccupancy of City Hall was the cost to do all of the work was starting at 10 million. And you may recall our discussion was it's likely going to be higher than that. The full HVAC system would have had to come out. The ceilings would have had to be replaced, electrical and more. We also looked at just reoccupying the police wing. And again, the cost estimate was starting at 4 million and we thought it was probably gonna go up. So we made the decision not to pursue that. In fact, it was in October 2023 that you all directed the permanent closure of City Hall. And this slide just summarizes why that decision was made. I think it's really important at this moment to remind ourselves it was not just the asbestos contamination, although that was the tipping point. City Hall is an aging facility. It had structural issues. It is not a resilient building that we felt would make it through a substantial earthquake. In fact, all of the interior walls had been identified as lacking bracing, and unless they were reinforced, would be at risk during an earthquake. So with all of that, that was the moment we decided to move in another direction. And I thank you for your leadership on that. This has not been an easy time for us, losing City Hall, but this was the right decision. All right, the Public Works Building. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Just again, some foundational slides to set the stage for the conversation we're gonna have in just a moment. At the moment we were closing City Hall and dealing with the asbestos, I did ask our consulting team and our staff team to proceed with the facilities conditions assessment on the Public Works Building. We knew the building was gonna need to be replaced, but at this moment in time, losing City Hall, we had lost our backup facility. So we needed to dig into that and understand what it was gonna take to keep the building going for another 5 to 7 years. We presented that conditions assessment on the Public Works Building to you in February of 2024. Again, I've put these slides in just so the deck has continuity, but I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for me to dive into this information today. The consultants will talk more about the details of this yard. Just the images kind of tell the story. The Public Works Building is at the end of its useful life as well. We have outgrown it. We have inadequate work areas. We are undersized, and really the site is very poorly laid out. These photos tell another side of the story. Our systems are aging. HVAC, electrical in this building, we're not up to standards, and in some cases, we're not meeting code. For those of you that have walked the site with us, I think all of you have been to the site within the last year. You know that the layout is poor, it's cramped, it's not efficient. We have a lot of major assets at this site that we use to keep our critical functions, essential functions running, including some pretty big rigs that we don't have anywhere to park. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Perhaps one of the bigger problems on this building is the green roof that is leaking and compromising the structure. In fact, on your agenda tonight, we'll be asking you to approve a contract to do some of the interim work on this building. Also consistent with City Hall are the seismic risks. These are the buildings that we rely on during emergencies, and neither City Hall or Public Works were built to the standards of today. We'll talk more about a level 4 building in just a minute. Based on these findings, it was last year, March, that we presented all of this information to you, and you directed us to prioritize the Public Works Building for replacement. So that is what brought us to today. We've combined the functions, both Public Works and Police, and a few others to be incorporated into a new proposed public safety and maintenance facility. We love our acronyms in government, so you know we call it the PSM. We'll continue to use that. What are we doing right now? Again, I'll be brief with these slides. The displacement of staff from City Hall, it's been really tough for all of us. We've been doing our best to be creative and work wherever we can. I'll remind you that about 80% of our city staff is on island every day, even with the closure of City Hall. So police, fire, court isn't on island, but they are rehoused. Certainly our recreation teams and our parks teams, Public Works, YFS is still working out of the Luther Burbank building, and all of our maintenance employees. The rest of the staff, the remaining 20%, are working from home, are working from Starbucks, are working here at the community center, anywhere we can find space. Current status for police. The photos on the right are the police modular buildings. I will tell you, our police department, this closure has been the toughest on them. I probably don't need to tell all of you that. Originally, when City Hall closed, we moved them here to the community center. That only lasted for a couple of months because the community center is at max capacity in the summer. They then moved to Luther Burbank while we were working on procuring modular buildings. Council, we looked at a whole bunch of other scenarios for police and ultimately landed on the modular buildings. Those buildings took over a year to get. They had a very long lead time, but they were fully operational for use in the fall of 2024. While these are working, I will stop short of saying that they are ideal. They are not ideal. The police department is very much looking forward to a permanent facility, and I'm sure they will all be watching our presentation today. Municipal Court, originally when City Hall closed, we leased space in Kirkland temporarily, and then we have found a more permanent location at the City of Newcastle City Hall, where we anticipate they will be really for the duration. I want to thank both the City of Kirkland and the City of Newcastle for helping us out during this time. Council chambers, I probably don't need to say much about that. We are in our council chambers now, Slater Room at the community center. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the Public Works building, having lost City Hall, we made the decision in July to perform some interim repairs on the Public Works building so that we could extend the life for 5 to 7 years. There were, simply put, some things that could not be ignored. Your review and approval of the bid award is on the agenda for tonight's City Council meeting. I've showed this slide before. I just want to remind you that we recognize as a city staff that the situation is not ideal for us or for the community. We've stood up as many resources as we could to make ourselves available and accessible to the community, even without a storefront. Our customer service team continues to knock it out of the park, in my opinion, working from all different locations and is available by phone and email. All right, so what have we been up to since last March when you directed us to begin work on the new public safety and maintenance building? Again, these are in your packet. I don't know that I need to go into them in depth. We began what's called the pre-design phase of our work. It's really the exploratory phase where our consulting team is working with our staff team and all of you to understand the needs and the scope and the operations. It's been really intense and fast-paced. I'll remind you that this building is replacing the entirety of the Public Works building and all of the operations housed there. It is also intended to house the police department, the Emergency Operations Center, the IT and GIS team, and I made a unilateral decision and added customer service to this building as well. The reason is that we do not have a storefront and we need a place for the community to be able to access us. We'll talk more about customer service in a bit. Why combine these departments? There's a lot of overlap in the work they do. They require some of the same types of facilities, things like locker rooms, mud rooms, a lot of storage. But these are also your essential public safety and maintenance teams. And this is going to be a level 4 facility. So combining them for efficiency makes a lot of sense. We'll show you in a bit what that combination looks like. We have had a lot of staff workshops in 2024. This is a picture of one of them where our architect team is meeting with our staff teams, really trying to understand our operations, looking at the intensity of use for things like vehicles and equipment. And again, I'll remind you, there's a lot of storage and a lot of things going on. I don't know how many staff workshops we had, but we've had a lot of them. Department findings, just some takeaways. We need to house about 40 police department staff. There's a range of needs: patrol, detectives, marine units, administration. Security is a common theme for police. We need their spaces to be secure. We need vehicles to be secure. Even though they're proposed to share a building with Public Works, the secure areas need to be separate. So flow and space planning is really critical. There is a public-facing side of police, a front counter. You may recall at City Hall, you walked into the back of the building previously. That's how you access police. We also need a front counter for the police department. Access points and control, you'll see, is a critical theme in our police department design. We also need things like interview rooms. I'm going to say this probably 100 times more: storage. Police has a lot of stuff they are responsible for, from evidence to vehicles, and so storage is significant. Marine patrol storage is also essential. Secure storage, these are spaces that can't be shared, like evidence, that has to be accounted for. Patrol lockers, locker rooms, and deployment mudroom. And I have to say, with the closure of City Hall, this is one of the most frustrating areas for police, is that the space to change and shower is not ideal. Switching gears here to Public Works, and by the way, these are high-level summaries. I'm not providing you with every detail. Currently, in our Public Works building, we house engineering, the capital project team, parts of Parks and Recreation, our utility teams, our right-of-way teams, stormwater, support services, which includes facilities, and all of our seasonal Public Works members. In the new PSM building, we're intending to house most of that list, with the exception of engineering and capital projects. Those teams, which I will say have more of an administrative function, may be housed in a different location. So we're planning for workspaces and support areas for about 80 employees, Public Works employees, in the new PSM building. In the main building itself, that means offices, meeting rooms, lunch areas, conference rooms. I should heavily emphasize that. We need conferences in rooms and meeting rooms. Storage, another huge need with Public Works, primarily in the yard. Similar needs for locker rooms, mud rooms, and cleanup rooms for field staff. We want them to be able to come in from the field, shower, change, and also have laundry facilities available. Something that not everyone is aware of, but we do, at City Hall, we had spaces for people to sleep overnight. When we're responding to emergencies, even just snow and ice, our teams need to sleep here. We need them to take a break. And sometimes it makes more sense for them to do that than to travel home. We are often running 24/7, as you know, during an emergency response. So the new PSM building will include sleeping rooms for our staff that can be used for both maintenance and police. Other things: loading, receiving. We take delivery of equipment, supplies pretty regularly for Public Works, also for police. And I won't dive into this, but the slide tells me over 100 pieces of equipment and city vehicles, some of which are pretty sizable. Switching gears, also in the PSM facility, we will be planning for a new emergency and operations center. For those of you that were familiar with City Hall, we had an EOC, actually a very sizable one. It was in the basement of City Hall. That was never ideal, but it was the space that we had available. Since City Hall is closed, we have operated the EOC several times, and we are running currently here out of the community center. EOC needs, I think you're pretty familiar with this. We need a large and flexible command center. This photo I had on the previous slide shows you what a typical EOC setup looks like. We need other breakup rooms for breakout. And like this picture here, this was during the evacuation that happened last spring due to the leaking water pipeline, and you can see that we had a large media presence here at the community center. So when we're thinking about the PSM facility, we need spaces for things like that that's separate from the actual EOC operation. The EOC also has high storage needs, things like food, water, and other supplies that we need when we're responding to emergencies. And last but certainly not least, the PSM facility is intended to host your IT and GIS teams. So practically speaking, that's all the servers and the network that powers all of our city operations and buildings. The IT GIS staff is currently working out of the Luther Burbank admin building or remotely. Our servers are still in City Hall, so they will need to be moved. We have somewhere between 8 and 10 IT GIS staff at any one time, so it's a smaller team, but really essential. We felt strongly, and council, you agreed, that these teams needed to be in our level 4 facility. Also, just practically speaking, Alfredo, our IT manager, is sitting right behind me. He will tell you that they spend most of their time supporting police and public works, which is not surprising given the heavy operations. So putting these teams together certainly makes a lot of sense. Shared spaces, I'm not going to go into this in detail. I think we should talk about it with our Northwest Studio team in just a moment. The efficiency of designing this building is identifying where we can share spaces, where Public Works and police can share. There are some circumstances where they can't. That's not the most practical or efficient thing to do. But that's what we're working on. Things like laundry rooms, mudrooms, locker rooms can be shared. Big kitchens can be shared. Loading and receiving areas can be shared. Marine Patrol boats can park securely where the Public Works main equipment is parked as well. So lots of opportunities for efficiencies. I'm not going to dive into this a whole lot. We'll leave it to Northwest Studios. Just remember, we're designing this building to risk category 4, which is one of the most resilient, hardy ways we can build a building. And we're doing that because this building needs to be operational in the event of an earthquake. Our current facilities are level 2, maybe. Yeah. All right. So with that, we completed all of our pre-design work in the summer of 2024, and we transitioned then to what we're calling the schematic design phase, which is where we really start to put details to the plan sets, and the building and the site really start to take shape. I noted here that during this process, I identified and am recommending that the customer service team be included in this building. We do not have a plan for another new building that would provide that storefront. And council, I know you've been hearing from the community, like, where do we go? We don't have a storefront right now. There's no place for someone to easily walk in and have access to all city services. So with that, we have added a customer service counter, which, by the way, there was one already planned for the building, but we've just proposing to make it a little bit bigger so that our customer service team can be housed here as well. And I think there are some efficiencies with doing that, because then they can also serve as the main customer service desk for the maintenance functions as well. All right, so a couple more slides and then I'll wrap up my piece. Work began on the schematic design in the fall. So we took all the information that we gathered from basically March through August of last year, and we started actually working on the design. That's where Northwest Studios steps in. We've been very busy, and I want to thank all of the council members for your participation. We've been touring other buildings. We have done many walkthroughs of our own site so that our design team can really understand what's working, what's not working, and how we need to evolve the new building. Here's a picture from one of our tours. We spent the whole day touring police departments. We went to Shoreline, the University of Washington, and Kirkland. You can see Mayor Neese, Councilmember Weinberg is in this photo, and some of our staff. I think this is a really useful exercise. We go out and see facilities that are newer than ours, learn what worked and what didn't work for them. Our facility tours are likely not done. We feel that there's value in continuing to go out and look at other facilities as our design progresses, and council will continue to be inviting you to participate when you're available. Last month, we drove to Kitsap County Public Works Facility, and Councilmember Anderl and Councilmember Jacobson joined us. Thank you for that. We chose that facility because first of all, it's a very large facility, much larger than our own facility will be, but they are also many of their public works functions are all housed at that facility, so we wanted to see how they integrated all the different types of operations. Again, really good visit. We saw some things we really loved and want to consider, and then they gave us some lessons learned as well about their building. And as I just mentioned, it might seem not obvious that we've been touring our own facility, but we have been going over the Public Works Building and City Hall campus with a fine-tooth comb and talking to the staff teams, really understanding operational flows and what's working and what's not working, and that was all incorporated into our design. And many design meetings. So as we started to see drafts of the facilities, we have been meeting again with the staff, and there will be another iteration with the staff in February and March. So after today's meeting, then we go back to the staff and walk through the design sets with them and get their feedback. All right, I guess this is just one of the final wrap-up slides here. I think it's very important for the council, the community, and the internal staff teams to know that what's being discussed today is not final. For those of you that have been involved in major construction, you know there's going to be a lot of changes along the way, not just over the next few months, but even in the next 12 to 18 months. Next steps and timeline, I'll just mention this real quickly. This is our first touch with you, City Council. We're tentatively anticipating seeing you once a month, probably through June and July as we work to finish schematic design. We do want to take this out on a roadshow. Even though most of what is in this building is internal operations, it's really important that the community understands what's proposed here, and we have an opportunity to get their feedback. That is the timeline for community engagement is March, April, and we'll be talking more with you about that. Funding, we will be talking about how to fund this. It's not proposed for today's meeting, but it's coming probably in the March, April, May timeframe. Zoning, we also just didn't want to lose track of this work item. The Public Works parcel, kind of that back parcel of the campus, is currently zoned residential. It's proposed to be rezoned for public institution, which is more compatible use with this essential public facility. We'll need to add that to our work plan, planning to talk to you in May about the whole suite of work plan adjustments that we need to make for the planning department. And with that, that was the overview of the background. Thank you for indulging me and walking back through that. Again, Council, I know you know that history really well, but community members and others may not have followed every step along the way. So with that, I will pause. I think we're going to switch presenters here. Is that the plan? But before, as we do that, Mr. Mayor, are there any questions, anything that any of you would like to add that I missed?
Okay, Council, any questions? Councilmember Jacobson.
Yes, I have a series of questions that are related about the existing city hall and its role in this whole project. So when the appropriate time comes, I'd appreciate the opportunity to put them on the table.
Okay. Physical questions or operational questions?
Well, some of both.
Okay. Well, you'll have to direct me on when the best time to get
okay.
to that is. Council, any other questions? Maybe just before we move off you, Jesse, the EOC, can you talk a bit about how many times it's been activated and the large kind of disasters or emergencies it's dealt with?
Good question. I'm not sure I have the exact number. I can give you a couple of examples. November, we activated the EOC for the bomb cyclone event. We were operating out of this room for, 7 days. That's the most recent. Last spring, when we had, we're dealing with the water supply pipeline emergency, EOC was activated. We were working here for weeks on end in that response. Those are the two most recent major, but we're standing up our EOC, unfortunately, several times a year.
Well, sadly, I've been here almost 8 years, and so I'm thinking back to the pandemic. The EOC was active for, was it more than a year?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that allowed us to consolidate all of our communications, points of entry, allocate costs. So that was a pretty significant lift.
That's correct.
Councilmember Wyberg.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think 2 or 3 generations in the future, because the building that we construct, we want to have last for, 50 to 100 years. And with the recent housing and density legislation and the expected increases in population on the island in the coming decades, was the expandability of the facility part of the design intent, like the ability to add a 3rd floor in the future, for example, or the ability to make the space larger than what it currently is, or was that a factor in the design so far?
Thus far, we'll be getting to this, the schematic design accounts for, let's call it the next 10 to 20 years of operation. So about what we think we need. We're not anticipating a lot of growth in the staff. Mercer Island is pretty built out. I think to your point, if we're taking on new pieces of equipment or something, we need to have some flexibility. There is a little flexibility in the yard. I think one of the things, that's one of the things we need to talk about in the next 3, 4, 5 months is how much growth do you want to plan for? What would that look like? So that would be some feedback for this afternoon as we get into this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council, any other questions? Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, this is great. I have some stress. I remember when Salim called me before the meeting that we had to I think the asbestos was discovered a few hours before a council meeting, and said, it was something like, Jesse thinks we might have to do this meeting remotely, so don't come to City Hall. And we had been there, I think, for all of 2 meetings or something. So I recall that, and it's exciting to kind of see, that was a step in the journey. Obviously, we were on a different path at that point, but this is exciting to see move forward. One question I have, and I don't know if you can put a number around this, but one thing that, sort of struck me when City Hall was open, but even just visiting the Public Works building, is the activity that occurs there, where this, I think one thing for folks to keep in mind is that this is not sort of a traditional office building. People show up in the morning and leave in the afternoon. There was a tremendous amount of things moving around, police cars coming and going. And I don't know if there's a way to put this in a number, but I am curious if you have an idea of how many folks sort of come and go on the staff on a daily basis. I think it sort of, in my mind, illustrates that this is a central hub in many ways, more than just sort of an office building.
Yeah, quick math, the teams that are proposed to be housed here, it's going to be more than 100 employees working there. The police department obviously is a 24/7 operation, but Public Works is too at times. And the last 3 days of inclement weather, we are running early and late shifts. During snow and ice removal, it is a 24/7 operation. So your point is well taken. The building and the teams that are proposed to work there are really the hub of the city and the essential suite of services that we provide.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Not saying anything else, maybe we'll push forward.
All right, I will look to my left here, and my colleagues from Northwest Studios will pick up the presentation. Mr. Mayor, we'll take breaks. This is intended to be interactive, so interrupt us, and we'll stop screen sharing for questions. You got it.
Okay, is that on?
Yep.
Great. Thank you for having us join you today at this planning session. My name is Aaron Young. I'm a partner with Northwest Studio. I'm joined today by David Cutler, who's also a partner at Northwest Studio. It has been a pleasure over the last several months to work with you all, with the city manager's office, and with the city staff, both through police and public works, on identifying some of the needs and working through some of the potential solutions for some of the needs. We're going to talk about 4 basic categories of content today. The first is just an overview of site conditions. The second will be taking those site conditions and using them to talk about a series of site and facility design strategies that really help guide us as we think about the physical development of these facilities. Then we'll look at concept design propositions for the site, the PSM building, the lower yard and upper yard functions, and those divisions will begin to make sense as we walk through the presentation. And then we have a series of questions that we'd like to pose. that are really coming out of our investigations that dovetail either with potential future resiliency or environmental options that we'd like to pose to you today. So starting in with site conditions, just understanding the site through its boundary line and aerial photograph. It's quite a large site, as Jesse outlined, with City Hall on the north against Southeast 36 and the Public Works yard, maintenance building and yard really backing up against Southeast 40th. The existing site is composed of 2 parcels. The northern parcel, CO, commercial zone, which is about 4 acres. And the southern parcel is a residential zone with about 9.4 acres, as I mentioned, abutting Southeast 40th. The total site area is about 13.5 acres. On this current site, there are quite a lot of facilities. The former City Hall on the north, parking for everyone who is coming to and operating on these sites. Currently, some of that parking has been occupied by the temporary facilities for the Mercer Island Police Department. The lower yard, which you see illustrated here, which contains the decant facility, vehicle wash areas, raw materials, organics, and waste bins. The Public Works building itself, which, as Jesse mentioned, are now really kind of full with staff offices and former maintenance shop areas and bays. The maintenance shop itself, the warehouse, and vehicle storage in the maintenance bays. The upper yard, up on the top of the bench, really approaching Southeast 40th, includes equipment storage, tool storage, vehicle storage and parking, raw materials, laydown area, and some other equipment. Now, as we started studying this, we also began to look at the site environmental conditions itself. We had an arborist undertake a report to identify and assess trees on the site. And this map illustrates all trees greater than 10-inch diameter at breast height within the property boundary. And as we step forward, we'll require a careful review of these existing trees in relationship to any proposed facilities on the site. Sorry, having a little delay here. There we go. We also had a wetland and watercourse delineation study undertaken. And that study identified 2 watercourses with several on-site piped segments and 6 small wetlands. This map on this page and the next page identifies the locations of these elements for further study. This annotation for a stream that you see along the driveway off of Southeast 36th is an unpiped segment that leads to a piped segment flowing south. You can see on this slide the position of those streams and wetlands really on the southern side of the site, up in the wooded area. Now, these identify locations that we will continue to study through more detailed analysis. But as we get to map those things across the site, those ecological conditions help inform areas for future work. This map illustrates the locations of the streams and wetlands, along with some identified buffers and setbacks. And these buffers and setbacks are organized around the type of watercourse or wetland, but do not yet account for areas occupied by existing structures or impervious surfaces, which are shown on this coming slide. You can see outlined in gray. These are the currently occupied areas for impervious surfaces and existing structures. And these really form the basis for future development on the site, for future planning studies. Now, this map also does not yet account for some boundary variations in those impervious surfaces that may occur with potential buffer averaging or mitigation strategies as we begin to more fully flesh out the position of facilities on the site. As we began to investigate the site with city staff, there were really 5 design strategies emerged from the site observations that were taken and some of the operational and programmatic reviews with city staff. Three photographs of the existing yard highlight one particular challenging condition. Those three photographs are taken just in proximity to the Public Works building. The first illustrates some of the existing facilities that were meant to provide weathering cover and protection to city vehicles and equipment, but which due to the size of vehicles today and the number of equipment stored, really only partially cover vehicles and equipment, providing limited coverage and exposing those vehicles and equipment to the elements. The second really identifies that many of those structures are simply not large enough or high enough to provide protection for some of the city's more expensive vehicles, like vac trucks and other equipment. Those are required to be stored fully exposed to the elements and to unnecessary wear. And the third photograph really highlights, it was kind of timely that we had snow, that existing public works operations during a storm event, and that this lack of weathering cover also means that the public works staff have to clear the yard before they can really get out and serve the community, taking some valuable time. So the first strategy is simply to cover more vehicles, equipment, and work areas to protect and promote efficient operations no matter the weather. Now, just as a recap, the existing public works yard, including these vehicles, are mostly uncovered and unprotected. New areas should be covered so that we can protect those assets and promote efficient operations. But that covering also begins to double as roof structure so that we can organize new facilities for efficient flow between interior and exterior operational areas. Which leads us to the second strategy, which is co-locating buildings with covered areas for operational efficiency and for cost effectiveness, leveraging that weathering cover for building roof structures and to promote efficiency indoors and outdoors. Now, the existing vehicular circulation on the Public Works site is entirely two-way. This map illustrates all the circulation on the southern end of the site where the Public Works building is located and all the vehicles and equipment are stored in the yard. This two-way circulation includes 2 loops and 3 dead-end legs. If we look at a photograph of those conditions taken from the roof of the Public Works warehouse, what we can see is a really congested condition with vehicle parking and drive aisles kind of blocked. We have parked vehicles blocking material and equipment access, blocking loading areas, parked vehicles blocking maintenance bays. We have spaces that are actually too tight for maneuverability and turnaround for ingress and egress. So oftentimes a vehicle has to be moved before other vehicles can simply be used. That, paired with the existing two-way circulation, creates quite a number of conflicts throughout the site. The two-way circulation with the ad hoc vehicle parking and the access requirements to stored equipment results in these conflicts which impact daily operations and take time when maneuvering in and out of the site. I think it's just important to return to, I think, one of the questions that was posed about the volume of operations daily, and it's important to note that the majority of the Public Works field staff are really in and out with vehicles about 3 times a day, once in the morning, once at lunch, and once in the afternoon. Have 60 to 80 people all maneuvering in vehicles around each other to try to get in and out to operations. Simplifying vehicular circulation could be one step that helps. And one way to do that is looking towards one-way circulation rather than two-way. And nowhere is this efficiency better seen than in comparing intersections. Traditional intersections, like the one shown on the left, have 32 potential vehicle conflict points. If we look at things like roundabout circulation, which are really entirely one way, that's reduced to 8 vehicle conflict points. So a radical reduction in potential conflicts and simplification in circulation. And so we would look to prioritize one-way circulation in the yard to reduce conflicts and operational impacts. And we had the opportunity to walk with the Public Works staff and create a catalog of the operations areas, vehicle storage, tool storage, material and waste storage on the Public Works yard. This map reflects that site walk, and it also reflects a challenge faced by Public Works staff. The yard operations are constrained by facilities that were designed 45 years ago. So they force a kind of ad hoc organization of vehicles, materials, and equipment on the site. This photograph illustrates again that typical vehicular parking congestion, with vehicles parked really wherever space permits, resulting in tight conditions with limited maneuverability. Oops. Yeah, and this map just highlights the quantity of those vehicles on the site, and the existing layout and sort of limited number of parking spaces simply did not anticipate the quantity of vehicles that would be needed 40 years later. And as a result, many vehicles are parked in drive aisles or in front of equipment. And we can see that here. Some of the equipment becomes difficult to access with vehicles parked in front of areas where storage occurs. It's often obstructed by vehicles and equipment, causing some operational delays to access that equipment. And an example of the material storage challenges on the site, this diagram highlights the storage of raw materials like salt, sand, and gravel. Currently, these must be stored in 3 different locations, requiring trips between these locations to gather and redistribute materials for use. So one of the strategies that we worked on with the Public Works staff is to organize the site into zones for clear and efficient use. Now, the Public Safety and Maintenance Facilities Program includes, we said 5 critical departments, but there are really 4 groups. The Mercer Island Police Department, the Emergency Operations Center, Public Works, and IT and GIS departments, and customer service functions. These departments have requirements that overlap and offer opportunities for shared facilities to maximize functionality and minimize the square footages required to help reduce costs of the facilities. So organizing the PSM building, just like the yard, into functional zones so that we can dovetail with overall site design strategies and organize these building uses into clear relationships with one another to the public access and to the yard to the south. So the final strategy that we looked at was organizing the buildings as well as the yard into zones that maximize the use of shared spaces and promote efficient operations for staff and create clearly accessible spaces for public services.
All right, I think we'll pause there and see if there's any questions on existing conditions or the design strategies. And council, I will let you know, had we completed that long-range facility planning, you know, these strategies would have been part of that process. So we've brought them in now. Our list is a starting point. I think it's important to work with the council over the next couple of meetings to make sure that this list reflects, you know, your collective good thinking as well. If not today, at the next meeting, I'd like, you know, to be looking at reviewing and continually working to approve kind of our design strategies list. We'll use that going forward to guide us. So any questions on operations? And by the way, sitting behind me is our staff team. They'd be happy to answer questions about what's happening in the building. Any initial feedback on design strategies?
Okay, Deputy Mayor Rosemont.
Yeah, this is exciting. A lot going on here. A question I have around the strategies, and maybe I'll get into this more, is that, you know, to Councilmember Weinberg's question before, sort of future-proofing this, like I can't imagine that VAC truck gets all that much bigger. But if the next gen does, I mean, how is that a strategy that gets worked in throughout sort of the design process, or what is the thought process? I just want to make sure that we're not, you know, in 20 years, oh my gosh, we can't park this truck that costs a huge amount of money because space isn't big enough.
Right. Jason, are you on? Actually, do you mind stopping screen sharing right now? Hi, Jason. Jason is home in sick land. Thank you for joining us. Jason, can you talk a little bit about the future of our fleet, what's known and what's not known?
Yeah, so in terms of our fleet size, the size of the equipment itself, I don't anticipate getting larger. The size that we have is, given the physical constraints of the island, the topography, some of the challenges that we have with the location of our utilities and things like that. Larger vehicles don't actually help us in a lot of ways because of the challenges that we have to face with our existing conditions on the island. So that said, I would say that the trucks that we have are probably about as large as we anticipate getting, because we're not gonna add to the size of our city. We're not gonna annex in elsewhere and things like that. So I'm confident in saying the size of the equipment we have suits our needs. I could anticipate it getting smaller or more compact. You could add other elements like trailers and things like that, but that wouldn't necessarily impact the height requirement of the vehicles. I also say there's WashDOT standards and requirements in terms of the size of vehicles and limitations associated to it, which this design team is taking into consideration. So I don't anticipate those changing over the course of the next 20 or 30 years. As far as our fleet goes, I think we're at the max size vehicles we have, and ideally we'd probably get a little smaller in some vehicles if possible.
What about the number of vehicles?
The number of vehicles is obviously, we evaluate that every 2 years as part of the biennial budget process. I will say right now we are right size for the equipment and needs that we have and the number of staff that we have. But that is it's a constant discussion that takes place every 2 years. And we're trying to be very mindful of the number of fleet vehicles that we have per the number of staff that we have. Again, we're right sized as it is now. Could it grow plus or minus over the course of the next 20 years? Absolutely. Is it going to be leaps and bounds to what it is now? Probably not. But is there, plus or minus 5 vehicles, up or down over the course of the next 20 or 30 years? I think that's very, very possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reynolds.
I just want to check on terminology. You used the term cover for the vehicles, but you didn't use the term enclose. So does that mean literally it's just a roof but open sides?
I can touch on that. So we have both requirements from city staff. We have requirements that identify vehicles that would simply require a cover, and we do have requirements for vehicles that would require a heated enclosure.
So we would have both depending on the vehicle?
We would have both, and we'll get into a little more of that when we talk about the concept design.
Okay. And is the plan that all the vehicles will be at least undercover, or are there some that would still be outside in the current proposal?
The current plan is that all staff vehicles used for operations would be undercover.
Okay, but employee vehicles are presumably not.
That's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah, so today, there are not electric vehicle options for a lot of the heavy equipment that exists out there. And it's likely going to be that way for a while, for maybe a decade or two. But certainly within the lifespan of these buildings, I think it's likely that the majority of the heavy equipment as well as the light equipment is going to have fuel sources other than gasoline and possibly long charge periods, as we're seeing with electric vehicles. I presume that we would still need to have the vehicles spread out around the site, albeit in covered spaces. Is the intent to also have the infrastructure in place to be able to make these chargeable spaces for the future when everything's electric?
Yes. So someone mentioned earlier the 50 to 100-year life of this facility. We are planning for full electrification. So the infrastructure will be put in place even though the technology isn't there yet. I'll remind the council that we received a grant recently to begin working on our electrical EV charging plan island-wide. We're taking that in bite-sized pieces and accelerating. The first piece is looking at the city facilities, and we're trying to marry that planning process with this process. So I just wrote myself a note. We'll be checking in with you on that soon and hoping to have some early recommendations by like June.
Excellent, thank you.
Great question.
Councilmember Weicker.
I just got to hand it to Jason for managing all this for all these years. And then to our designers, I had a question about the wetlands and water courses and how delighted or annoyed you were to see those when you first started exploring the property.
All information is good information. It's, they become opportunities and constraints that help inform our work. Part of the future investigations will be to understand what of those things, for example, steep slopes, were created through the spoils of past work, or were created through legal grading, or actually showing up because there's structures embedded in the hillside and not actually steep topography. So we'll be cataloging those in greater detail as we go through the process.
Jesse, do you want to just speak a little bit more detailed? Provisioning for EV doesn't mean putting chargers in, it means conduit, right? It's the minimum amount of provisioning
That's
to be
right.
flexible in the future, I presume?
That's a great question, and I appreciate the clarification. We would like to have all the conduit in place so that we're not going back to dig up the site when, one of the Vector trucks becomes electrified. So that's the way we're looking at this, be smart. Many of our projects right now, the former Tully's property parking lot that we're getting ready to break ground on, it's being built the same way. The conduit's in place so that we can put the infrastructure in when the time is right.
And maybe this is a follow-up for you, Aaron, but in EV charging, the thing that we see the most is just impractical or not well-thought-out placement of charging ports, relative to the vehicle. The vehicle charges in the rear, but there's no way to back in or something like that. Cables, I presume that, in a large covered space that's open, you have lots of opportunities to drop charging exactly where you need it.
That's correct, either from above or from below. One of the persistent challenges are the challenges presented by different auto manufacturers for the location of the charging apparatus on a particular vehicle. But we'll work with the Public Works staff on identifying the trajectory for some of those locations so that we can plan for it as best we can in the schematic design phase.
Excellent. All right, Council, anything else? Councilmember Weinberg?
Yeah, just one other clarification on the electric vehicle charging. I think the technology is going to continue to change and standardize, and so it's wise, I think, to not install the wires now for all the spaces, but just the conduits like you're talking about, because the wires that we install 20 years from now are going to be very different, probably, from what we're doing today.
Councilmember Jacobson?
From a square footage comparison standpoint, what is our current square footage of covered space versus what you're proposing at this stage of your work?
I don't have, but I will get an accurate square footage count on the areas that provide cover for vehicles and equipment, but I would say that cover is largely only partial, as we showed in one of those photographs. For example, today, some of the trucks are 22 to 24 feet long. The depths of some of the covered bays are 18 feet deep. So the Public Works group is struggling with that parking and partial wear on, you can actually see on the back end of some of the trucks rust, developing on some of the kind of attachments, while the front end is staying nice and clean. But we will get that comparative number for you.
For the council members, we're taking notes. I know there's going to be some questions we can't answer, but we'll be happy to follow up with you to get that detail. Councilmember Jacobson.
Councilmember Reynolds?
Apologize if I missed this, and I'm sure I'm going to use the wrong terminology, but my understanding with land use is there's typically kind of two stages to the wetland determination. One is you've just got some maps that through GIS process have been marked as wetlands. And then a second stage where you actually go to build or design things, you do the field verification. Have we done that second stage?
So I'd actually add a third stage to that.
Okay.
So there are.
So it's
you're
even
correct.
more off than I thought, so good, you'll illuminate me.
3 stages. We have done some field verification, but that field verification is sort of visual confirmation. And what we need to do is go in, clear a little bit of brush to get some tighter measurements on the water course, but also begin to look at some soil sampling for some of the areas that we believe might be spoils related to steep slopes so that we can confirm, where those came from and how they arrived on the site.
And I take it if some of those sites have been created through human action, do we have more flexibility to undo that human action that caused it? Is that what you're kind of suggesting?
That is something for review during the application process.
Okay, thank you.
quick question about the roofing. So, you know, in the city inventory of roofs, we have winners and losers. Living roofs, I presume, are in the losing category, and we're not gonna try that experiment again. But flat roofs with all the foliage that you talked about, are we doing flat roofs, slope roofs?
If you don't mind, I'd like to hold that for some of the concept design presentation. Just to touch on that briefly, we are looking at primarily flat roofs, though they are low slope roofs. And we'll talk about those both in the context of their covering, but also their capacity for other infrastructure that could benefit the site.
Gotcha. Okay, council, any other questions? Councilmember Jacobson?
Yes, how much grading does your proposed planning require on the lower and upper areas of the southern of the two parcels?
I just put my grading calculation away. However, it requires approximately 27,000 cubic yards of cut and about 15,000 cubic yards of fill for a net 12,000 cubic yards, at least at this early stage of calculation.
So would that be export at this point?
That would be export at this point, yes.
All right, not seeing anything else.
Great. Thank you for the questions. We'll walk through the concept design stemming from those design strategies and programming. So looking at the site first, and looking at the site organization from north to south, the general strategy is to organize the most public, where entries and parking are visible and easy accessible towards Southeast 36th, with the most back of house, where the kind of existing hilly sites and trees are located to screen public works activities on the southern side of the site, much the way the site is currently organized, so not really a great change there. Moving from things like landscape buffers and future flexible uses on the north or against Southeast 36 to parking areas, a proposed location for the public safety and maintenance facility, and secure areas just at the kind of southern end of the current City Hall parking lot. The maintenance and equipment building just to the south of that with covered storage for vehicles and equipment alongside it, and then the upper yard towards Southeast 40th. That breakdown of facilities is identified on this slide. You can see the public and staff parking located just off Southeast 36th. The proposed public safety and maintenance building containing the Mercer Island Police Department, Customer Service Center, Emergency Operations Center, and Public Works staff, along with the secure functions for the MIPD. Just south of that, what we're calling the operations building, which is where we have the maintenance shop and bays, warehouse, primary location for equipment and tool storage, along with the covered and enclosed and heated vehicle storage. To the side of that, across the stream, we have what we're calling the eastern lower yard, and this is primarily covered but open vehicle and equipment storage, along with fueling stations, diesel, unleaded, and propane. And then just to the south of that, up the hill, the upper yard, which would locate the decant facility, a wash bay, raw material storage, material laydown, and organics and waste. Now, vehicular circulation, which we touched on in the site conditions, is a particular item to pay attention to. Very nicely, the current site has two ways in and out along Southeast 36th, and primarily the eastern side has been public and staff circulation, even in existing conditions, with the western drive really dedicated for city vehicles. We propose maintaining that and really dedicating and reserving those for each of those functions, and I'm going to walk through that. So for public and staff vehicle circulation, on the eastern side of the site is the primary entrance to arrive at a public parking lot with clear access to the PSM building and customer service entries. This parking lot includes, as you're seeing it, approximately 120 spaces with the balance of code-required parking located elsewhere on the site. The western driveway, though it's reserved for city vehicles and is controlled by an access gate, just south of the arrow that turns right there. A diversion lane is located on the inbound lane, because if you're like me, you're gonna go in that driveway on accident, and you're gonna need a way to get to the public parking lot without having to back up or interrupt public works operations. City vehicle circulation would ingress and egress on the western side of on the Southeast 36th Street driveway. This is a two-way drive aisle that guides vehicles from Southeast 36 into the project site. That drive aisle is anticipated to have an inbound lay-by lane to assist Public Works in managing the potential queuing during high-volume times for deliveries or vehicle traffic. As you can see in this diagram, once onto the Public Works yard, circulation moves in a one-way loop used to manage circulation between the eastern and western halves of that lower yard, with a two-way circulation to the upper yard, again operating on a one-way loop. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail as we zoom into each one of the plans later in the presentation. So as we step a little further south on the property and look at the potential public safety and maintenance building. From Southeast 36th Street, vehicles would move past this building into the Public Works yard, with the exception of police vehicles, which have a dedicated drive into secure parking entries located south of the building. You can see the location of public and staff parking coming in off the eastern driveway, with a public and staff entry and lobby prominently facing that parking area for good visibility. And this is just a concept view passing the Public Works public maintenance building on the left, moving up towards some of the covered parking areas straight ahead in the lower yard. The Public Safety and Maintenance Building has a pretty diverse program. It occupies, as currently planned, about 36,000 gross square feet on 2 floors. These include the Mercer Island Police Department, which occupies about 16,600 gross square feet. The Emergency Operations Center, which utilizes about 5,600 gross square feet. Public Works, IT, and GIS combined to about 10,000 gross square feet. Customer service, public counters, and staff areas at about 6,300 square feet. And quite a very large group of shared spaces at about 12,000 square feet. Now, if you're doing the math, you'll note that that adds up to way more than 36,000 square feet. And it adds up to that, to more than that, because we've been able to work with all of the groups to plan the overlap in a lot of spaces, how they can share a lot of these spaces to reduce the size of the overall building. And we'll walk through that as we go through the plans. To illustrate how this works with the prior diagram in organizing zones off of the public parking areas, we mentioned that we have that direct public lobby and access for public services, with the Emergency Operations Center directly adjacent to that. We'll look at vertical circulation in a moment, but directly above those spaces are really a lot of the shared programs, because those can be used by staff, by EOC operations, by MIPD, and by the Public Works operations group, which are located primarily on the second floor. Now, we'll take a walk through the building plans, the ground floor first, and then we'll move up to the second floor. And we'll do that just first in an overview, but then by each department, because it's useful to see how they're organized on the floor and how they overlap. The ground floor of the building is about a little over 19,000 square feet, not including exterior parking areas, with a public entry located off of the public parking areas, directly into the public lobby, with the customer service center really facing and fronting that public entry. Emergency Operations Center and Functions to the east, and Mercer Island Police Department organized to the west, with secure parking organized to the south. If we really look at the areas in the ground floor utilized by the Mercer Island Police Department, it's the bulk of the floor, because they have a lot of very specialized uses which take place really on the eastern side of the building, really the eastern 2/3 of the building. with utilization for the EOC room for meetings and for training, with dedicated storage off of that room so that it becomes a real functional place for them to use. Shared conference room activities also happening in that remaining eastern third. The bulk of MIPD staff dedicated entries are on the southern side off of the secure and covered vehicle parking areas, with Sallyport entries on the east and staff and pedestrian staff entries on the middle and to the west. Other secure storage for long-term vehicle storage, screening, and other materials that need to be away from the building are stored in a zone on the southeastern corner of this particular building. Looking at the Emergency Operations Center, you can begin to see some of the overlap. So the primary EOC room is located on the northeast corner of the building. That is right off of the public lobby. So this room we'll look at the other functions for that room in a moment. But it is surrounded by small conference, large conference rooms, call centers, storage areas, support stations, ham radio facilities, and staff entries and secure entries at various points around the building to promote kind of an efficient flow of operations. The customer service center and city staff areas utilize many of the same spaces because though the EOC sees a lot of use, it is not in operation all the time, hopefully increasingly less. And that room becomes available for staff meetings, potential training, volunteer training related to EOC activities, and other operations for customer service center. The shared workspaces on this floor really overlap with a lot of these same areas. EOC doubling as meeting and training rooms, small and large conference areas really being used by city staff and MIPD throughout the building. Storage areas for all of those staff, workrooms, and vertical circulation. And then one final diagram illustrating the public access areas of the building, really from the public entry on the north through to a small conference room, the EOC room for potential volunteer training or other activities, and the public lobby itself, which is shared between customer service and MIPD. We've had a lot of conversations with staff and the police department about the beneficial relationships there for operations. And a public lobby that's also big enough to host necessary computer stations and work tables that would enable CPD staff to have small meetings with applicants for questions. As we move up to the second floor, we can see that this floor is primarily occupied by offices and collaboration spaces on the western side, with shared workplace facilities located directly above the kind of central stair located here, an elevator, and vertical circulation in the building. This floor is connected by a walkway across the parking area below to the Public Works yard to the south. The second floor of this building is approximately at the same grade elevation as the Public Works operations building to the south. So this enables Public Works staff to walk directly out of the building and move over towards the Public Works yard. Again, that western third of the building, or 2/3 of the building, really being occupied by open offices and collaboration spaces primarily, with select private offices and enclosed meeting spaces occupying really the middle of the building, with IT, GIS, server rooms, storage and supply rooms located to the east. Primary staff entry to and from the Public Works yard, located around the shared workspaces. So that staff entry is located with meetings, lunch and break areas really occupying the middle of the shared workspace zone, with the eastern side of the building occupied by the kind of nuts and bolts of the shared workspaces here, which are the equipment lockers, sleep rooms, cleanup spaces, mud rooms, laundry, restrooms, changing rooms, showers, all the things that the Public Works staff need to operate on a daily basis with the equipment that
So I think we should stop there for questions. We went over the vehicle circulation plan and loosely the building plan. Mr. Mayor, I'll remind you, we have the big plan sets here in hard copy. If at some point we're tired of sitting and we want to get up with our roving mics and look at the plan set, we can do that too.
Okay, council, any questions at this stage? Councilmember Jacobson.
Yes, in the PSM facility, are there plans for a jail or a holding area for the,
Yeah, let's maybe flip back. We don't have all the spaces labeled here. There we go. And the chief is here too. So Chief, if you want to kick Robbie out of his seat, or Robbie, I'll bring you the mic. So I can have Aaron show, we can have the chief talk about how we handle in custody flow through the Sally Port, and then Northwest Studios, do you want to point out where the holding cells are right now?
The holding cells right now and processing are located in the northwestern corner of the building, where my cursor is currently flowing, with the Sally Port located directly to the south of that.
And Chief, did you want to say anything about how that is intended to function together?
Sure. The purpose of the holding cells is really just temporary to process a in-custody arrest, possibly photograph, fingerprint, DUI processing, et cetera, or further interviews. And so persons would be brought through the Sally Port, which is a secure entry point, into the I guess the top left corner there would be a series of secure holding cell rooms and a hard interview room where detectives or officers could interview those persons as needed in that area. And then when we're done processing, then they're transported to whatever jail we're housing them at.
I do want to just share with you, council, we have a series of meetings scheduled, it looks like the second week in March now, with the whole police department. We're hoping to take this this design and run it through them as well. We anticipate they're going to identify some things they want changed. So I just want to let you know that we have that touch point coming up as well.
Do you think you could touch on the locker room situation and the police? For me, I'm unsure where that is.
Yes. So the locker room, in which my cursor is located really in the middle of the building here. Unfortunately, in this plan, what are not shown are the locker bays themselves, which are here and here. This is aligned with a lot of contemporary strategies. This is a shared locker room, so this is not meant for individual locker room facilities where you're kind of changing at your locker. These are lockers to hold equipment, day's equipment, with changing rooms, restrooms, and shower rooms provided for privacy of individual occupants.
Okay, so as we toured police facilities, and it was good to be able to, accompany the chief and some of the other PD staff on that. Locker rooms were the big issue, right? There was a lot of design decisions that locked people into staff mixes and, genders that didn't always work, didn't optimize space. So it looks like with this open concept, you can just kind of mix and match, and as your staff ebbs and flows, the facilities kind of accommodate those shifts over the decades.
That is correct. The goal here is to arrive at a design that doesn't require future renovations to accommodate the changing makeup of any one department. And we can also talk about that upstairs when we talk about the public works lockers and facilities as well. Great.
Councilmember Weicker.
I love this idea of the public access areas. So I wonder if you could speak a little more to, A, how flexible that space is, and B, how important it is for any number of reasons we would need that space going forward. I think that's a fantastic addition.
So good question. I think you've gleaned from the presentation, this is largely an internal operations facility, and the security of the building and the yard and the vehicles is of utmost importance. But it is a public facility, and allowing it to be used in some ways for community use, I also think is very important. The EOC space, we moved it to the front of the building, and the EOC will be built so that in a moment's notice, we can all arrive, pull out our equipment, supplies, and be ready to go. It will likely not be set up as an EOC permanently because we don't need to use it all the time. However, if Amanda Cavercamp was here, she would say, Jesse, wait a minute. I need to use it for trainings, and that's exactly what it's intended to be, flexible. So we'll be using it for volunteer training. We would also likely make it available for community use, with the understanding that if you book here, we may have to bump you out if we have an emergency. But that is all going to be designed so that you can come into the EOC. There's restroom facilities. There's, I won't call it a kitchen, but some limited, refreshment stations so that community group could be here, have access to those facilities and not have access to the rest of the building. I'm getting into a little bit of the operations of this space, which really needs to be further fleshed out. In addition to the police having another touch in this, so will the EOC team, which is not just our emergency manager, but it's all of us that work on emergencies. So we'll be talking about that in the next 2 months and reporting back to you on the staff. The public lobby area, we've had to fuss with this quite a bit, is intended to be a shared space so that if the police staff are on lunch, the customer service staff is there and can at least assist and direct traffic. But the backside of that public lobby, the police side is secure, right? It goes into a different space that is not accessible to the rest of the building. So that's how we're trying to put all the pieces together so that we can work together, cover our public lobby and have some access for the community. I'm not sure if that answered all of your questions. All right.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the Z vector on the plans here. So there's a walkway that goes from the second floor back to the Public Works yard. I presume that's leveraging the fact that we're on a sloping site, and so that having that walkway means there's going to be police vehicle parking underneath the walkway.
Correct.
And notice that there's the mudroom is in the building such that people coming back from working up to here in mud or something else in the field will be walking across that bridge before they get cleaned off, or it's a kind of initial clean out in the
hose them
by
off
the
on the other
vehicles.
side.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have kind of a pre-rinse and clean-off area on the other side with the operations building, yeah.
So just, I think you're pointing out a good feature that we maybe didn't call out in the earlier presentation. That walkway, and I'll have Northwest Studios use their cursor here, is elevated. So we're taking advantage of the grade. And remember, the Public Works folks are not going to be sharing an entry with police. So they're coming from the yard across the elevated walkway into the Public Works space. We did separate, in the end, we separated the locker rooms. I think we had talked earlier about trying to figure out how to share police and Public Works. There's some practical challenges with that, particularly our officers having to remove and securely handle things like gun belts. So for right now, that's split, but what's shared here is the sleeping rooms. So if for some reason one of our police personnel needed to spend the night in the building, that is a shared space. I hope that covered.
Yeah, so I think you guys covered it. The source of the question, I guess, when people are coming across from the Public Works yard and into a mudroom, I presume that means there'll still be some debris that needs to be cleared off, which means there's going to be some of it getting on that bridge. And when we clear off that bridge, it's going to be unless we have nice drainage around there collecting that, it's going to be dripping down onto the police vehicles. So it's I'm just trying to make sure that we're thinking about the Z factor and what's underneath there.
Those
That's
are
a good
great
comment.
comments,
Yep.
yeah. I will say the finishes on the building, we're far from that,
Yeah.
but this building is designed to be very utility in nature. So we know particularly the Public Works crew, with all due respect to them, are messy and they're coming from the field. We want to make sure we can clean up easily. So like this type of carpeting will probably not be found in very many places in the building.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
My question was about how the police segment was designed in terms of, was it a comparison to other facilities or to similar size? But it sounds like that there's more to come on that after the next touch, so maybe I'll just check
We
back in a
can,
few
we
weeks.
can share a little bit, and some of you were on the tour of the police facilities, so I would invite the council members to share, and then Chief Sutter can also talk about, you know, his experience working at other police facilities. I'll remind you that our city hall building was originally an insurance building. It was never built as a police department or a city hall, so it is fraught with inefficiencies, which is why we took time touring, to really start to get our heads around what more ideal space is. So I'll turn it back to the council members that were on those tours, and certainly Chief Sutter chime in about what we've learned.
Well, I think one of the big things for PD is the circulation of staff. You know, the staff are doing a lot of different things, and they're sometimes by themselves, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in teams, sometimes with, you know, a member of the public that was under arrest or not. Questioning people, having people come in for interviews. There's just a ton of people circulation, and so it's good to look at that plan with multiple entries into the secure parking, you know, entries into the lobby, and circulations that seem wide enough to accommodate, you know, those last large staff movements, but without being excessive. You know, we saw some police departments that they were placed into a building that was existing, and it was very large, so they had a problem of too much space, and maybe they were challenges with excesses. But it does look like a fairly well thought out design, and it does look like it has some room for growth. So I appreciate that.
One of the questions that we will come back to, it's sort of woven into several of your comments, is where do we have room for growth? I'm not prepared to point that out here yet. There's not a lot, but there is some. And I think the other thing we have to think about is this type of building is the most expensive type of building we can build. So we need to be thoughtful about overbuilding it and not doing that. Administrative types functions can be housed in other buildings that are less costly to build. So that's on balance. We're really trying to just use this building for truly the teams that need to be in a level 4 facility. Wasn't planning to break down where all the staff will be housed today, but that is on my list for a future presentation, so we have an understanding of that.
I will say that, you know, in talking to a lot of the police personnel and the other departments on the tours, placement of the police department within a complex, and then, you know, geographic and building features around it were critical to their how they perceive their space, their personal safety operating in and out of that space. And it looks like, you know, from a site design perspective, you've chosen really an optimal placement. The ingress and egress looks ideal. And I would think that, you know, and I would love to hear from our officers how they would feel about that placement in terms of their professional comfort working in it. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Yes, you mentioned the square footage of 19,000 square feet. Is that the entire structure we're seeing on this particular drawing, including the parking?
Yes, sir, that is not including the parking, that is including the enclosed heated envelope of the first floor of the building, but it does include all the mechanical, electrical equipment rooms, storage rooms, and the like.
So then we'd be just under 40,000 feet, if I'm understanding where your math is going. We had the second floor.
Yes, it's about 36,000 square feet with the second floor. The second floor is slightly smaller.
Okay, another question, if I can be indulged here, Mr. Mayor. Will the structural design of this facility provide for expansion over the parking area if that is necessary at some future point?
That's a good question. We've been talking a lot, a lot about parking. Do you want to take this one? And
Yeah, so towards the end of this presentation, we have a couple of questions to pose to this group for further study. One of them relates to structures, and the other one relates to the possibility of additional parking zones with building above. So we'd like to daylight that with you. I would say that at this early stage, it's we'll take your question for further study, but we have not yet looked at the structure in enough detail to identify areas where you could build above.
Councilmember Weicker.
Final comment. I love that you put the offices in the middle of each floor, so that leaves some flexibility and a lot of light coming in.
The shape of the building, kind of the longer linear building was intentional to allow as much natural light as possible. And to your point, you know, the offices, if we can, will be in the core so that we can keep those, that natural light coming in. We all worked in a very dark city hall with not very much natural light.
Okay, not seeing anything else.
Would you like to take a break now or keep going?
Council?
Keep going, this is cool.
All right, looks like you.
So the next area we'll talk about will be the lower yard, which is just south of the PSM building that we've just discussed. And this is broken into two halves, about the creek that we looked at earlier on the maps, the operations building on the eastern half, and the covered vehicles and equipment on the western half. So that lower yard, although it's really just two simple structures, an operations building and a covered area, it has quite a complex program. The operations building, which is approximately 33,000 gross square feet, that's inclusive of a mezzanine, which we'll look at in a moment, includes enclosed and heated vehicle storage for select vehicles, a warehouse for material, equipment, and tool storage, the maintenance shop and the maintenance bays, including space for Parks Department maintenance areas, loading and operations, temporary parking, loading areas and loading zones, staff areas, storage for emergency operations, and waste collection. The covered vehicle and equipment storage on the opposite side of the creek includes parking and storages for approximately 60 pieces of equipment and vehicles, including oversized vehicles as well as trailers, and fueling stations for unleaded gasoline, diesel, and propane. As we look at that site plan, and to orient you, the PSM building that we just looked at is on the north end of the site. You can see part of the police parking just right there. As you come in from Southeast 36th Street, you're presented with this one-way loop that we've discussed. There's a primary loop that moves around this area, off of which you can circulate into covered vehicle storage. Apologize, some of our lines are off. Covered vehicle and equipment storage on the left, and the operations building and the covered operations area on the right. Just a concept view of those overhead weathering covers from the operations building area looking to the west. So this diagram illustrates the basic programmatic operation of this single-story high bay operations building. And high bay means that we're talking about bottom of structure height of anywhere from 27 to 30 feet, so that we can clear things like larger vehicles lifted up on maintenance lifts or overhead gantries to erect equipment on top of some of the vehicles. So that warehouse areas and storage areas below with some mezzanines for systems and storage above. As we look at the plans of this, the ground floor of this building hosts quite a diverse program. So from that central loop, ingress into the building is through a vehicle entry, and there are a series of staff entries as well, man doors. A vehicle entry on the southern side of the site. You can see inside the primarily parking for oversized vehicles. Sorry, my mic keeps cutting out, I apologize. Oversized vehicles and equipment parking on the right-hand side, with maintenance bays of the same size just north of that, culminating in the shop, office, and staff day rooms to the north. On the western side of that, we have additional parking for vehicles and equipment that need to be stored indoors or loaded up from tool storage at the warehouse, with a vehicle exit from the north taking you straight out to that one-way circulation loop and access drive. The warehouse is located between that one-way loop and this, this primary vehicle storage area, sized both for forklift aisles as well as hand truck aisles, with a loading zone, dedicated loading zone, and temporary operations parking so that city staff can pull up vehicles, load them with equipment, and then head out for the day. Those are located so they also operate on that one-way loop. Pre-rinse and cleanup occur in this small detached building with emergency operations storage located adjacent to that, and waste bins for organics, recycling, and general waste available. This is the only area where a vehicle will be required to back up to kind of pull in one way and back up to load and unload waste or emergency operations items. Above this floor, there is a mezzanine that's approximately 7,500 gross square feet. We take advantage of the fact that this is a high bay structure to utilize an upper level to that warehouse, so we really double the available storage for the warehouse, and then organize building systems, mechanical, HVAC, and plumbing in a mezzanine just to the north. As we look, the next piece of the project is really that upper yard. So driving from that one-way loop up on a two-way loop, up a two-way route up the hill, from the lower yard to the upper yard, what we find is another one-way loop that provides head in and backup access to a decant facility, areas dedicated for material laydown, raw materials, and organics and waste around the perimeter, with a wash bay located in the middle and waste bins located just to the side of that. Now, I will say we've labeled this as preliminary organization because the vehicle maneuvers here are quite complex. They're very large vehicles. Sometimes they're working in tandem with backhoes and other lifts. And so we're still in the very early planning stages of all of this, and I expect this to change quite a lot as we continue to work through with operations staff. But this does represent the programmatic components of the proposed areas in the upper bay, or upper yard.
So before we jump into design questions for discussion, I thought we should answer any questions you have about the yard.
Okay, Councilor Jacobson.
Yeah, could you go back one or two slides to this one right here? We may not have enough stuff to justify it, but I've noticed that in a lot of warehouses now are using robots rather than people, or for large stuff, forklifts and things. And I don't know if robots require more room than forklifts or something else, but is that whole subject of where the industry is going or where warehousing going, you guys looking at that?
I think that's a very good note to us to pay attention to the trajectory of warehouse storage operations so that we can understand any big structural constraints like the height of that mezzanine so that we can allow for that as it's evolving.
Because I from my tours of the existing facilities, one of the sore points to Public Works, and Jason will correct me if I'm wrong, is the difficulty in getting at stuff, let alone not enough room for it, and having to move this to get at that, and these kinds of things, which are, inefficient, but also don't permit us to store larger volumes of stuff, which we might want to do if we're going to self-perform maintenance or something of that sort.
It's a great question. I think the other thing for the ops team and our design team to work on is what's the right capacity for our warehouse? We have a fairly large warehouse facility now, and our storage has evolved. We can get things a lot more quickly, so we don't need to stockpile, except when we have an emergency, then we need to have a stockpile. So I know Jason and Elaine is here. They're thinking through with the design team how we right-size this. And I think the robotics question, especially learning about how Amazon warehouse are operating now is a valid point. Thank you for sharing that.
Along those lines, one other thought might be that at the present time, there wouldn't be access, as I see your drawing here, to from the west side or the exterior of the building for the warehouse. And I have no idea whether one of those kinds of things would facilitate offloading whatever stuff Public Works wants to rat hole in its deal, but that's another thing you might want to look at or talk to those people, because my understanding is that from talking to the people over at Kitsap, that's not something that's optimal for a variety of reasons over there, and that if the world were perfect, they'd have much more or a discrete ability to stock and destock stuff. So anyway.
That's a good point, and just to clarify, I kind of blew through that, but just to clarify this, there is loading and unloading access both on the ground floor and mezzanine level from the western side,
Okay.
as well as from the eastern side inside the building. So we'd like to come at that from two ways, just to your point exactly.
Got it. Thanks.
We should also, I'm writing a note, we can show some photos from our tour of the Kitsap facility. I think we were all struck by the amount of storage they had. But Councilmember Jacobson is right. It in some ways, it was like a college dorm room because they couldn't get to it and they were tripping over it. So they had a lot of space, but the access was tricky.
Councilmember Weicker.
Yeah, I'll just say, I love the maintenance bay ideas, because there's the maintenance you plan for, and then the maintenance that comes up as you're doing your operation. So giving our team that flexibility is really appreciated. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah, hi. So in the covered vehicle equipment and storage area, I presume, is our largest vehicle currently the vac truck in terms of both height and length? Or is there, is like one of the Marine Patrol boats, when it's on a trailer, is that actually taller?
Probably have to double check with Jason. I think the vac trucks are the tallest. There he is. Save me.
No, you're right, the vac trucks are the biggest that we have.
Okay, and I know that the Marine Patrol boats, that there are some of them that we are looking to replace with a next generation. Are there some boats that we are looking at that would actually be larger? And are these spaces designed to be able to accommodate a future generation of watercraft?
That's a good question. We're actually in the process of replacing Marine Patrol vessels. So I will put on our list to talk with the chief and our police personnel about the future planning for boat height. I will say, in an earlier version of these plans that you did not see, we were trying to get the Marine Patrol boats into the parking lot behind the PSM building to keep all the police vehicles together. It just does not work to trailer in. And one of the things we learned from our site tours is the more backing and maneuvering in that police parking lot, the more likely we're going to have damage to vehicles and our facilities. And so what has changed, and this is where we need to spend some time talking with the police department staff and our design team, is the boats, when they're on trailers and parked, or the trailers are parked, are now intended to be in the backyard with the other big pieces of equipment that we own. So again, that's on our list to talk with police about, but it's just not practical to get trailers into that police parking lot. Good question about the boats.
And one point of clarification on that covered vehicle and equipment storage area, that covering is anticipated to be at the level of high bay as well, so 25 to 30 feet to underside a structure, so exceeding all of the state WSDOT requirements for highway clearances.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Naive question here, but I don't know the depth of those spaces there, but do you allow for a boat and a truck so that there's room to back it up, or to use a forklift to turn it around once it's in the building to pull it into the spot?
In this configuration, once a truck with a trailer moves into a spot, the trailer is detached and the truck moves on to parking.
But is there room to, do the three-point turn or whatever to back it up?
Well, the nice thing about this being one-way circulation is that we're actually moving in one direction, pulling right into that stall, and the truck can move out in a one-way direction and continue on one way. So we're not requiring any backup movements to perform that activity.
Good.
In fact, we were trying to avoid the backup maneuvers where we can through this design. That's part of what we'll have to exercise with both police and public works to see if we've achieved it or where we need to problem solve further.
Can you talk a little bit about the wash bay and the operational functions? Obviously with indoor spaces, there's need to, clean equipment before you bring it inside, but maybe speak a little bit about that.
I'll I'll talk a bit about the positioning, and I can defer to Jason about all the operational maneuvers that they undertake. Currently, the wash bay is located in the lower yard, or the wash area, I would say, open air, located in the lower yard next to the decant facility. Those two activities really, as you're washing down facilities or kind of taking material off of vehicles into decant, they kind of require the same filter apparatus to move into the sanitary sewer. And so we've co-located these activities here. Vehicles are washed down for a wide variety of reasons and on different schedules, and I'd let Jason touch on that if I could.
Sure, so I mean, you summed up pretty well. So we have things like our hydro excavators that need to wash down on a regular basis, daily basis, oftentimes when they're being used. Our street sweeper, when that's in use for, call it 7 to 9 months of the year, that also gets washed down. During the peak summer months, usually our mowers are used in this facility, as well as some of our other pieces of equipment. Following the snow and ice event, the materials that we're putting down tend to be pretty hard on the equipment, and so they get washed down. They use this area, so it depends on the functionality. But all the teams use these locations, use this wash bay for their ongoing daily operations. Each team, depending on what they're doing, I'll say it's a highly used area. It's being used constantly throughout the course of the day by multiple teams and multiple people. So it's a pretty essential piece of call it equipment or space for this facility.
So if there's a lot of debris, a lot of mud and leaves and things coming off, what is the maintenance related to this wash bay? How does that all get cleaned out?
So one of the...
Great.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead.
No,
No,
please.
I was gonna say, you go first and I'll add to all that.
Okay. Well, one of the strategies that comes all the way back to the site planning was really to locate the dirtiest activities, up on this upper yard where they're kind of concealed and screened. So there's a lot of material spread out up here, as you've seen probably in your walk around on the lower yard of the current site, from the organics and waste, the raw materials. A contemporary wash bay would really have side walls, in some cases end closures. We'll work with Public Works staff to know what works best for them, so that a lot of the clean off and spray isn't migrating through the air to other places, but is captured in that specific zone and is able to be captured and filtered.
Okay, so large amounts of dirt, mud, all manageable by the system?
That's correct.
I'll add to the fact that this facility in particular is tied to our MPDS program and our sanitary sewer system, and so it's part of our ongoing routine maintenance in terms of both inspections and ongoing maintenance clean out as well. So it's something we already currently do.
And so the high pressure systems, are they electric, are they gas, are they hot, are they cold?
They come in all shapes and sizes, and in fact, some of them are still manually operated, and some of them are actually automated with separate manual options to clean out the beds of trucks. So I think one of the things going forward will be to understand which type works best for the current public works needs and uses, so that we can right-size this facility to match that equipment. And that equipment does change, kind of like all technology, so.
Yeah, and maybe Jason, you could just add some character around, the ability to clean equipment quickly and efficiently at a low cost related to the equipment life, the lifespan of the equipment. Does that increase how long our equipment is serviceable for, how good a care we take care of it?
Yeah, absolutely it does. It's a pretty quick cleaning setup for us to do. It's an important piece, and that is to prolong the expected useful life of that equipment, right? So that is the goal behind it. Talk about your street sweeper. We don't want debris sitting inside that sweeper. Especially when it's sitting over long periods of time, that tends to rust out the inside of that sweeper quicker, deteriorate quicker. Same thing on the sanitary sewer side. Same thing with mowers. If the mower decks aren't being cleaned after they're being used, again, it tends to rust out the mower decks and the blades quicker. So it makes it more efficient and lessens the lifespan of the equipment if we're not maintaining it. So this is this is an important element of any public works facility.
And remind me, what is the sweeper cost these days?
300,000 plus for a standard model, and if you want to go to the alternative fuel technology, you're looking at 1.5 to 2 times that cost.
Perfect, thank you. All right, anybody else? All right, we'll move on.
So this next set is the first set of design questions we have for the council. I imagine every time we see you, we will have another list of things we'd like to talk to you about. Just to set the table here, we're not looking for a design decision today, but to illustrate the types of questions we'll have to answer and really to get a sense from you of, on this list of, I think we have 7 items, you know, what are rising to the top for further study so that we can come back and share more information and maybe what's not as appealing at this time. So, Aaron, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to walk through, as Jesse said, 7 questions that are really some choices or opportunities associated with these facilities. The first of which is looking at solar power generation potential. So what we have highlighted at the map on the left are the roof surfaces, the coverings of all of the areas on the site. And this project, as you can see in the map on the right, which looks at the solar casting and availability at 30 feet above grade in the yellow, is a really good candidate for solar power to increase power generation, emergency resiliency, or to support future vehicle and equipment fleet electrification, and to potentially lower ongoing operational energy costs. We've taken an early look at this, an early pass, and based on the areas available in those covered roofs, with some down factoring for efficiency and other pieces of equipment that would need to be on those roofs, the preliminary read by our consultants really identifies that, for example, the PSM building might produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 420,000 kilowatts, while its energy use based on all the uses in the building would really be something like 415,000 kilowatts on an annual basis. Now, we haven't gotten to the granularity of tracking these month by month. We know in this region that can vary quite a lot. But the operations building, likewise, a little less energy intensive, with 250,000 kilowatts of predicted energy use and about 330,000 kilowatts of possible energy generation. And the covered vehicle and storage, quite a wide discrepancy, right? Very low energy use, 30,000 kilowatts, with 10 times that in energy production. Now, these figures do not yet account for fleet electrification, but they do reflect the potential balance that would be available to provide power for fleet electrification or other opportunities. As we looked at this with our consultants, we felt that this might be a good candidate to step forward so that we could evaluate for you the trade-offs between installation cost, facility resiliency, long-term energy savings for further consideration.
Okay. Council, any questions about that? Councilmember Anderall.
Thanks. Yeah, I have a lot of questions about this, and I don't expect you to answer some, all, or any of them today, but as we go down the road, my curiosity is on the all-in costs of this system versus the all-in benefit. And when I say that, I mean cost of the solar panels, cost to install, cost to maintain, cost for batteries, cost to dispose of, cost to replace, what the expected life expectancy is. I mean, and I'm saying this fast because you're nodding, and so these are all things that you have on your punch list, versus how much we could expect, you know, in benefit, versus how much does it just make sense to buy green power, and whether there are any potential negative implications in terms of stability of the roof with the installation of the solar panels. I don't want another leaky roof, not just in my lifetime, but in this decade, or I mean in this century. So those kind of things are all like really important. If the math and the calculus proves out, I'll be all thumbs up on it, but otherwise, I'd be hesitant to say, do this because it sounds cool that we have solar power in the city's fleet. The other thing is, then, if you are gonna look at this and can calculate, is there a shortened life for the solar facilities if we add more things that need to be charged? So.
Okay,
That's
thanks
it.
for that.
Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Just a question on the blue and yellow and orange map here. I'm assuming the blue squares are current trees,
That is correct.
so I'm also assuming the black lines are buildings.
They stand in for the approximate locations of the roofs.
So should we assume that those blue would turn to whatever the closest color is?
Debris from the trees would be
Or is that
affecting the
the
panels?
shadow, or, like, if you look at the operations building and the lower right-hand corner there, there's a pretty big, well, I'm assuming that's a tree now, but should we think of that as being yellow once the building is built?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We did our best to remove a lot of the trees. We've been through about 5 or 6 iterations of this solar casting map. And you can see that in some areas, like this, the kind of island in the middle of that operations building, black square, is an island that currently does have trees on it. It's also where a lot of some fuel storage, material storage, other things kind of take place. So there are strategic locations around the site where trees will need to be removed to accommodate some of the facilities. I apologize that we actually didn't get the few in the southeast corner of that square.
No, that's okay. And I guess I wonder, like, when you factor in solar production, how does the height of current trees versus what that would look like in 20 years play in there?
That's a good question, and we'll pose that to our consultants. PAE is working with us PAE Engineers is working with us to look at this, and their initial evaluations have been based on their experience with similar conditions in the region, facility types that are similar, but I think this is a unique condition which warrants more detailed study.
Cool, thank you.
If I may as well, I want to just address the trees. I spoke to, I can't remember who it was, one of you in December about the trees on the campus following the windstorm, where tree fall was significant on the island. There's a balance that we're going to have to strike on the site. That wasn't a good choice of words, strike. The tree nature provides shade, and it's a real advantage to us during the hot summer months. During a windstorm event, having trees fall on our essential public facility is not ideal. The tree plan is not done yet. It's obviously, our code requires us to preserve as many trees as we can. We have a nice natural buffer around the back parcel that we'll seek to preserve. What gets planted internal to the site, we're gonna have to be really thoughtful about for the future. That's that, one of you was using the words future-proofing in an earlier conversation. I like that term.
I think the follow-up to that would be that, for the list of questions, would be like the tree health of some of those trees currently, and some of them, those are really old trees around there. I don't know what shape they're in.
Councilmember Weicker.
I'll just say, having worked for an electric utility for over a decade, distributed generation is the future. Future-proofing this site for power outages that we might experience in the region, especially during emergency. This energy independence is crucially important, and I bet the math will pencil out once we figure out what rebates and incentives we can get, as well as just the use and benefit beyond the buildings generating more power than they're using. So fully support looking into this further.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah, just a +1 on what Councilmember Weicker said. This is a RC Level 4 building, which means when the rest of that island is down, this building is up. And having its own power on site is huge. And so we shouldn't just be looking at what can it generate during normal times versus taking power from the grid. We need to be able to make sure we can power these buildings even when there is no grid.
So, speaking to level 4, when we had the bomb cyclone, we lost a lot of cell communication on island on day 2 of the power event. And you had in your drawing the ham radio room, right? And so the ham radios tend to have a lot of antennas and needs for roof. How have you kind of factored that into what looks like the most ideal roof for solar the other appurtenances that need to consolidate on that roof?
So with respect to solar and things we'll talk about in a moment, like rainwater harvesting, we've taken a loss factor to the gross square footage of the roof so that we can account for some of the things that need to take place up there, including some mechanical spaces and equipment that will be housed on the roof.
Okay. And in terms of, future of policing, we've seen already with LAPD, AI drones that are going out and surveying and looking at, a 911 call comes in and it goes straight to that call to get eyes on the situation to understand what resources need to be dispatched. Is there roof space that is going to be dedicated for a future of that in policing? Obviously a drone landing, maybe autonomously, you need an area that is extremely safe and devoid of people. Roof is going to be a natural spot for it, and it looks like your best roof, right, with a line of sight for takeoffs and landing is that roof.
That's a great question, and we'll definitely look into that.
Okay. All right.
I have a follow-up question.
Councilmember Randall.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume, but you can nod or shake your heads, no, but that these facilities will have generator backups.
That's correct.
So is it fair to expect, say, in a 7-day storm or a 4-day power outage, to be powering these buildings via solar power? Or is it fair to expect that the generators will do the work, or is there some combination?
To be determined. To be determined. I think using both tools, if solar becomes an option, is a really great scenario. But in the end, we have to have buildings with lights on during the 7-day power outage or the 30-day power outage in the worst case scenarios. So let me get back to you on how we didn't mention, yes, generators are in the program here, on how solar would interface with generators. And obviously, Councilmember Andrel, you mentioned right at the beginning, the all-in costs, all-in benefits analysis. That ROI analysis is not done yet.
Right. Just a follow-up question, then, do we have a choice of fuel yet on the generators? Is it diesel or natural gas, or is that TBD as well?
That decision is not made yet.
Yeah, I mean, I figured that was more granular than where we were at this point, but I would be curious about what the pros and cons of those fuel choices are.
You're bringing up when we do projects like this, it's been a while since I've done a building of this scale, but it's like thousands and thousands of decisions. So keep raising them, and we're taking notes and remembering that we need to come back and answer those questions.
Right, it's like building a house, and by the time you're down to picking the hardware for the cabinets in the kitchen, you're just done.
Done, yeah.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm no surprise to anyone. I'm sure I'm all in on the solar idea, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One is that I think the reasons to be supportive of solar are environmental concerns generally, and possibly economic issues. We'll find out when we see the numbers. But I'm going to concede that I don't think it's going to be a material resilience advantage, just because most of our power outages are going to be in the winter. And I'm assuming that generation capacity is an average over the year, and in the winter it's going to be a lot less than current usage. And current battery technology, you'd probably just have to fill one of those buildings with batteries to be able to run the buildings for more than a day. So we do it because it's the right thing for the climate and the economy, but not for the resilience, in my viewpoint.
Okay, anybody else? Not seeing anything? We'll move on.
Okay, the next item we wanted to discuss was also related to the 3 large roof coverings. And just a note that these surfaces are also capable of harvesting rainwater for on-site storage and reuse in non-potable conditions. The Public Works, as we discussed with vehicle wash bays, and then wheel washes in other locations and cleanup, uses a lot of water. And if we can reuse this rainwater for on-site storage for non-potable uses like vehicle and equipment wash, wheel wash areas, general site maintenance, it has a capacity to lower the city's operational costs by reducing demand for potable water. A preliminary look at that harvesting Just in one example, we took a look at the operations building this time, rather than the main PSM building, to understand, based on its size, use cases, at a high level, what would the operational monthly water balance be based on harvested rainwater as compared to non-potable uses, other uses being vehicle wash, site maintenance, and then non-potable flush valves, if it went to that degree. And what we found is pretty staggering. You can see the blue areas really highlight the water capture over the course of the year. The bright purple areas highlight the non-potable uses for vehicle wash, cleanup, and site maintenance. And the dark purple areas highlight non-potable use for fixture flush valves, of which there aren't very many in this building. So when we looked at this and had this preliminary read, we felt this was another item that might warrant further look, both in, as we discussed earlier, its sort of life cycle cost, but also in terms of its potential operational savings for water use throughout the course of the year.
When you do the solar seasonality, can you overlay it on this chart for me?
Sure. And I think we also need to generate this solar capture by month, like we're doing here as well. Yeah.
So my first question would be, capturing what looks like a tremendous amount of water, and you mentioned the water courses and the natural kind of water elements in the site. Does this have any negative impact to the function of those?
We can evaluate that.
And maybe this is a question for Jeff. I thought that we didn't have code to support the use of this type of water in this way. Is this a new state kind of mandated use of water that people are allowed to do?
That's a good question. How about that? Yeah, that's a good question. I'll want to look into that a little bit with Gareth, our building official, and talk to the gentleman here, Aaron, from Northwest Studios.
Okay, so we may be considering a technology or a use that potentially our code doesn't quite support.
Mayor, I have an answer to that. Since 2009, the state has allowed use of rainwater collection for non-potable uses. And I believe I've talked to Gareth, and he's confirmed that our code does include plumbing code provisions that allow for the collection and distribution of non-potable harvested rainwater for those purposes.
Okay, excellent to hear. Anybody else? Councilmember Whitaker.
Fully supportive of this initiative as well.
All right, not seeing anything further. Next one.
So the next one is also on water. Understanding that this risk category 4 building, as you all outlined a moment ago, needs to continue operating for a period of days when the electricity grid may be down. Likewise, water supply can also go down. And one of the potential inclusions that's been brought up by our consulting team was considering potable water storage on the roof of the PSM building. And in this case, we've talked about sort of two use cases, 10,000 gallon or a 30,000 gallon tank, depending on the number of days that the building might want to function or might be targeted to function without water from the city system. The rooftop storage tank enables gravity-fed water distribution for facilities, so not really requiring pumps for the use of the water during emergencies that might affect the water supply. The preliminary look identified that a 10,000 gallon tank could provide potable water for select fixtures in the building. Again, we'd kind of scale down on what you're using to accommodate that for about 10 days, while a 30,000 gallon tank would provide that use for about a month. And these are really preliminary based on typical use profiles. We'd have to drill into this with some of the more precise use profiles for police department shifts and other activities in the building during emergency operations when quite a large number of people might be using the facility.
All right, Councilmember Jacobson.
With respect to potable water storage, is there a time limit that one has to use that in before it's, or can you keep it up there for months or years?
I will have
Do you
to-
know at this point?
I don't know. I'll have to get my consultants to follow up with us and provide you an answer.
Good, thanks.
Celine, I have a question too.
Councilmember
Oh,
Andrew.
no, go ahead if you have one.
Well, I was just going to ask some questions about the pressurization of this and just storing it on the roof. So you're suggesting storing it on the roof allows you to have no pumps and then use the plumbing fixtures in the building. But there's certain fixtures wouldn't work, right? Like we see in a typical institutional bathroom, the toilet flush valves, they require a good amount of pressure, don't they?
They do require a good amount of pressure, and so part of including potable water storage on the building, if we're looking at gravity-fed systems, involve a look at the fixtures that would be fed by those systems in the event of an emergency. So I appreciate your question, because what it daylights is that it's not a standalone piece, right? It comes with other considerations.
Why not just pressurize it so you could use everything?
That's something we could visit with our consultants about.
And then if that's the case, why not put it underground?
You-
I
Mr.
mean,
Mayor,
would-
you're-
Would it be cheaper, maybe per se, to put it on the ground instead of on the roof because of the weight-bearing part
I
of
will
it?
tell you, when Northwest Studios presented this to us, I went, water on the roof, little PTSD. This is why we're having this conversation.
Well, I think you and I are in the same boat, all right? I guess I should have added water to, I don't want a living roof and putting 30,000 gallons of water up there.
We are really thinking that right now, we should be exploring potable water storage on site. I think the use of the roof structure is one option, but just based on some of the emergencies that we've had recently, I think we should have that available. So, and I'm seeing you all, many of you nodding your heads. We can keep looking at this. This was kind of an initial scenario.
Yeah, I think you're gonna get a lot of agreement on it. But, I presume there's some structural work that has to go to put that much weight up on the roof as well. So it's not without some cost, is it?
Well, it's interesting because the storage of water spread out on a tank actually doesn't add an incredible amount of load to the vertical structure beneath it. So in a past life, I spent 20 years working in New York, and all of the new construction required a water tank, on the roof so that it could support fire suppression systems in the building, because gravity was inarguably the best method of feeding those things down through the structure. When we visited with PA engineers about this option, their first response was on the roof for just those reasons. However, we think there are a lot of opportunities for locations based on how we might organize the systems in the building. And to Jesse's point, I think the question then, we'll pull it off the roof, the question then is really about exploring potable water storage. And then finding the position in the site or within the buildings that really meets all of the needs and expectations for that system.
And I would think, Councilmember Jacobson's question is one that I would have as well. If there were a way to store the water, but also cycle the water with the regular use of the building, maybe on the inflow, for instance, if there's a manifold or something, that would seem ideal. Councilmember Weicker.
And I've seen that with fire systems, so yeah, whatever that flow system is, I'm sure there are options, so fully support looking into that too.
Was that a Councilmember Weiberg?
Yeah. So I presume we're not the first city to try and design a water storage system for both fire suppression and also for long-term storage. So I presume that there are some standard solutions out there, including tanks that actually circulate the water. So the water doesn't just sit there for years and years, but it's the water that gets used that day and it gets refilled like our reservoirs do. So I presume this is all very doable. It's just a matter of finding what's the right way to do it based on what precedents worked out there.
Councilmember Andrew.
Yeah, so it's $250,000 pounds. I mean, that just, I saw Craig do a little head fake when you said it doesn't add much to the vertical, strength required for the building, and I kind of internally flinched a little bit myself. But, I mean, I'm going to trust the architects and the engineers on this one, but it just does seem like a lot of water. And if we were to do this way, I mean, it would have to be just fail-safe, in my opinion. But I have a question about what is required to be potable and what is not. I mean, would we have to have potable water for the people who are showering, or could that be rainwater? And is there a way to kind of put any sort of a purification system in that's cost-effective, where we could purify the rainwater to have it an allowable use in some or many fixtures?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, but not without the complexity that comes with the systems for reuse of rainwater or gray water, formerly non-potable water. PAE engineers who are working with us on this project also worked on and completed the Bullitt Center in Seattle, which you may be familiar with. It harvests rainwater and uses gray water in all of the building systems, not without a high degree of complexity. They also recently completed a 500-year building in Portland that's also risk category 4 that utilizes some of the same technologies, even though they're a decade now more advanced. One of the reasons we initially targeted with the rainwater a lot of the non-potable uses is because that's the simplest system for reuse of rainwater. Stepping beyond that requires filtration and treatment and storage for limited amounts of time when it becomes used for really not even potable conditions, but other uses inside the building, even captured for flush valves, begin to require that kind of uptick.
Okay, thanks.
What we can do as well at maybe the next meeting is have PAE join us, and we can talk a little bit more in detail about the mechanics of and the options we have.
Okay. Not seeing anything else, we'll push forward.
So the next item is something that we'll continue to look at, which are the structural systems for the buildings and weathering covers, because as you all probably know, that is a big cost driver for a lot of buildings and a lot of structures. That selection of a system is based on an incredibly wide range of factors, including site conditions, some of the functional requirements, the facility type needs, load and seismic analysis, material availability, environmental impact, building codes, system costs, and trade conditions and sources for raw materials. And for review, the factors above are kind of consolidated into 4 overarching conditions. The applicability for a risk category 4 structure, just so we can make sure it's compatible with what you need to construct. Achieving the spans required for efficient layouts and use. The overall cost of the system, and other considerations like alignment with climate action plans that are adopted by the municipality. Now, as we consider a range of systems, I'm going to outline the 3 big ones, mass timber, steel, and concrete. What we know from engineers and current work is that all 3 of those are capable of meeting the requirements for risk category 4 structures. We know that all 3 of those are capable of achieving the necessary spans for these structures. We know that concrete tends to be the most expensive of the 3 based on the materials and labor involved and the heights and shear conditions involved. And steel and mass timber, in this region particularly, tend to trade off for which one is lowest cost. Our cost estimators have seen a 3% back and forth shift between steel and mass timber over the last several years. And then in terms of climate action plan alignment, mass timber lines up directly with long-term GHG reductions. Steel, we gave that a kind of plus minus because it really depends on the sources, the forging methods and emission controls used during production. And concrete structures may align depending on manufacturing strategies to reduce impacts, fly ash or other substitutions or additives, but may not fully align with long-term policy targets. So let me just highlight this. So as we begin to look at this, in early schematic design, we have focused our efforts on the differences between mass timber and steel structures. And we believe that it's incumbent on us to continue looking at those differences to bring you a little more information on the pros and cons of each, including the potential cost swings, the procurement methods, which are actually different for both of those systems, and what that would mean for the longevity of the structures. So this was a bit of an informational.
I mean, while you have that picture there, that steel framework, if that is what's over our equipment that we're trying to keep clean, and you're gonna get a lot of birds in there.
That has come up in conversation. One of the things that is often not recognized about a steel structure like this, particularly indoors or outdoors, this one is indoors, but outdoors, it really requires a soffit in order to close that volume so that you don't get birds and other things kind of nesting and finding homes up there that end up kind of, getting equipment dirty and et cetera.
Oh, so Councilmember Jacobson.
My question, let me get it in the right order, would be, have we looked at the cost differential between the categories for our upland, if you want to think those, other than the PSM building? Because, if the PSM building is still standing after the seismic event and the others aren't, we're SOL to some degree, and maybe our ability to react. So I don't expect an answer to this at this moment, but the cost comparison between upgrading the upland buildings to, category 4 so that they're, at maximum resiliency, assuming there are no more categories. That would be something that would be of interest to me, and I don't, as I say, expect an answer at this moment, but.
I can actually speak to that. Currently, everything on site is being designed and estimated as risk category 4 for that reason.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Weicker.
So to follow up on that, can you mix and match the two depending on where they are and how they're covered? Like find the cost benefit and the climate action benefit?
Absolutely.
All right. Not seeing anything else.
The next item is also related to structure. Now, we mentioned that concrete was the more expensive of the options to pursue. However, it does provide different benefits. When we look at one of the lower yard structures as an example, this is the covering over the western side of the lower yard, which provides cover for vehicles and equipment. One of the things that we've discussed with Public Works is that should that covering be converted to a concrete structure, then it begins to have the capacity to become a load-bearing deck, which opens up its opportunity, because it's at grade really with the upper yard, to begin to translate into about 25,000 square feet of additional upper yard laydown area for Public Works operations. So this is obviously not without an expense that we would need to bring to you to fully understand, but the opportunity is there as you're building out this site to kind of create over 20,000 square feet worth of usable area that otherwise wouldn't exist for future operations for Public Works.
Aaron, before we take council questions, this is kind of that like 30, 40, 50-year horizon where we're looking at capacity. I know you all have talked about, well, what would we use the roof for? Can you share just some of your off-the-cuff ideas and just to get the conversation flowing?
Yeah, as you walk around the current yard, what you'll see are light poles, pipe, park benches, a lot of outdoor equipment that are stored kind of in a kind of ad hoc on top of other structures in grassy areas off to the side. So there are a lot of surplus items waiting to be reused, items that you've received that are longer, heavier, or bigger than you might otherwise store inside the warehouse, that we've reserved space for in the upper yard, but that long-term, we need to understand what to use the term future-proofing of that area might really need to be. We need to do some further work with Public Works to kind of project that and understand more what those uses might be, but that's just one example.
Okay, Councilmember Jacobson.
Well, with respect to the lower and upper yards, do we have a feel for how good our subsurface soil conditions are for foundation purposes at this point?
We have not done any geotechnical work at this time.
It's a great question.
The other comment, I guess, is less a question, would be, well, let me ask. First, I have an assumption there's gonna have to be some grading done in the lower and upper areas, the extent of which we don't know at this point. But if we had to do some grading and we wanted to have more horizontal area available for something else, some other point in time, the incremental cost of some additional grading to give us that anchor out to windward might be a good investment in my mind. Let me make one other comment, going back to something you said earlier. Back in another life, when I was a lawyer, I represented most of the roofing contractors in this area, and including the 2 or 3 largest ones. And I once went down to one of my clients' projects that he was re-roofing schools, which he did, almost all of which were flat roofed. And so I was looking at it and I said, hey, Wayne, how come it looks like that you're actually changing this into a slightly sloped roof? And he said, oh yeah, we're doing that, and the architects and engineers will never notice, but we'll also never have any callbacks because the water will drain out. And I don't know if you guys designed that in there so that you've created a place for the water to go where instead of down it goes sideways or not, but something to bear in mind. And particularly we're having, some fairly large flat roof areas on this project, and water will find its way out.
So from a design or operational perspective, does having that upper deck as parking add a whole lot of columns to the lower level that wouldn't be there otherwise?
The idea behind having that upper deck would be primarily material laydown, but it would require the operation of heavier equipment on that, to your point, to drivability. And yes, it would require, with a concrete structure, the columns would be more frequent. It would require load carrying capacity for those activities.
So I think one of the things that we can do for the next meeting, and Councilmember Jacobson and Mayor Neese, I think you're both heading in the right direction, is where on the ground do we have additional room, if any, to make more space for laydown storage? What does that look like? And what we're constrained by is critical areas in the back. So we can analyze that, and then I think we need to do some trade-offs, because storing on that roof is gonna be pretty considerable cost. But this is the moment, right, where we're making decisions for that future council and administration, to possibly have additional capacity. So I think that's one of the things we need to look at is there any more room in that back property for additional laydown, and then analyze the costs of enhancing that roof for additional
And,
use.
I'd also encourage you to think about racking solutions in the limited space that you have for long, poles and light poles, traffic, things that could be stacked vertically in a more organized way that would give you a little bit capacity on the ground that you don't have.
That's great.
Okay, what's next?
We're almost there.
2 more items. The next is actually the roof extents of the public safety and maintenance building itself. The schematic design currently includes a roof that you see on the left that covers the PSM building, of course, covers the MIPD vehicles on the northern side of the parking lot, the official vehicles, of which there are 23 spaces. And then 11 spaces on the southern side, which are really reserved for staff vehicles. One of the things that we're looking at are the potential cost savings in the roof structure based on different areas. So on the right-hand side, you can see the diagram of covering the building, the official vehicles, but not necessarily the staff vehicles that are parked in that secure area. So We're going to continue to explore some of these reductions, but we wanted to highlight one of those early kind of value engineering considerations for you as a part of this conversation.
One of the things I want to call out here is for the police department, having their staff vehicles, having enough room for their own personal vehicles to park behind the building is one of our priorities. And that's just because if a vehicle is going to be targeted, it's potentially their personal vehicle. We've experienced that on the island. So that's what you're seeing. All the PD vehicles and personnel vehicles would have access to that back secure parking lot.
So I would just say from police tours that I was on, that full roof coverage is extremely important, covering that full police vehicle bay. I also think you might want to talk to IT and talk about how they're in and out of those patrol cars supporting that equipment, because that half roof, depending on how wind and rain kind of interacts with that space there, maybe only half dry, and they're working in and out of patrol cars with doors open. It might be much less than ideal, but having that full coverage will give security as well as operations benefits.
Mr. Mayor, I'm glad you highlighted that, because in our early conversations with IT and police, that was actually one of the drivers for the covering here, was their frequent need to access the vehicles out in the lot and service them. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, I
kind of
don't see
keeping us
any other
focused on that.
service bay for police vehicles, so it's going to be done out in the elements. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say I'm supportive of as much covered parking as we can possibly afford, because it is going to reduce maintenance costs. We're not going to have to deploy our snowplows into those parking lots. We're going to extend the life of vehicles, both staff and city. And so, I guess we should probably try to do a cost-benefit analysis on this like I ask for everything else, but I'm a big fan of covered parking.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Well, I'll just mention this in passing, and this is not a passive-aggressive dissent from what the mayor and Councilmember Andrel have said about covering it. But I think I'd like to commend you, Aaron, and your group for looking at value engineering, because in the end, we have to go out to the public, and all 7 of us have to be on board with the fundraising part of it. And one of the things we have to say, or assure our colleagues, is that we've squeezed all the excess out of this, but where necessary, and this may be a case where it's necessary, we've decided that investment is a more prudent course of action. And but the value engineering part is extremely important, and particularly imbuing that on whoever the GCCM is, it's in down range on this.
And so let me just add a little bit of color just from the tours that I went on. One of the North Seattle sites had a parking garage right next to it, and it looked over the Sally Port. And the Sally Port was open to the elements, and the parking lot was open to the public. And this created a significant operational challenge for the police, which, have to go, that's where people know they're gonna be. It was lit up at night for operations needs, and it created a significant kind of overwatch scenario where the public had best line of sight into the police operations, and it really did impact officer morale, safety, and things like that. So I do appreciate the value engineering comment. I don't want to think that my comments were flippant about a full roof, but I heard a lot of comments.
When I disagree with Salim, I'll just tell you. How's that sound?
Fair enough.
If
All
that
right,
ever occurs.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Also supportive of a full roof. I think that pulling the roof back and exposing our staff's personal vehicles to the elements to save money would impact morale. I think it's just the wrong thing to be saying to our staff, that we should be respectful of their vehicles. If we do have to do that, then there's going to be less longevity on their vehicles, which means they're going to need to replace their vehicles more often, which means they would that would need to be entered into the next negotiation with their union. So I think we should do the right thing for our staff and have a full roof.
Okay. Not seeing anything else.
The last item that we have here is a question, is a discussion of a potential parking garage at the PSN building itself. As we mentioned, we were holding an area of about 120 spaces north of the PSN building in early planning. Of those, about 80 spaces would really be required for building facility staff parking. Right now, the PSM building is at grade. You can walk from the parking lot directly into the public lobby. Police have grade access to the parking lot behind them. One of the considerations would be to take that entire structure and elevate it a story. So that in the diagram you can see here, you're creating basically a single-story parking garage underneath the building that we've just been talking about, with MIPD parking on the second level of that parking garage. That would create approximately 90 covered spaces, subtracting for building cores, access, and other things. To shift that parking lot from fully north of the building to sort of slightly under the building, requiring less space north of the building for public and staff parking. It comes with a considerable cost, right? We're constructing an entire floor of fully enclosed parking structure, so it comes with all the ventilation and fire protection requirements. And it begins to remove the public lobby and other access conditions 10 feet above current grade, so above the public parking zone. All of those challenges can be, looked at through a design lens. That's how we might solve those. But this is one of the items that is a kind of bigger ticket consideration that we wanted to present today for potential consideration to study further.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Oh, before we get rid of more of your guys' brain cells, I think we ought to do some jungle math on the ROI on this whole thing, costs and benefits. Because I think you can get a big number to do it. And I think when the trade-offs come, we're gonna have to trade stuff off, and I have a sense this would be a trade-off early on in the process to make this project affordable, but that's my opinion, not to be confused with.
Our gut instinct was this is probably gonna be a no, the cost is gonna be high, but we've played around for the last 6 months with trying to lift parts of the building, and we wanted to show you that it's possible. Could you flip back a slide? I think the council, you're aware that we're reserving the front part of this property for a future use, which is not determined yet. And so one of the things to take into consideration is that if the city were to need to add a building to the front of this campus, that building may require structured parking because we may not have enough room. That's not necessarily a problem for today, but those are sort of the puzzle pieces that we've been working on behind the scenes is future planning. On the other hand, you have enough room on this campus for surface parking, for sure, based on what the original, the plan we presented earlier. I didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Mayor.
No, you didn't. Councilmember Weicker.
Taking that into consideration, I think this is mostly an internal building with internal use, and at this point in time, and needing to go ask our public to support this in the first place, this is an easy one to take off the list of things to evaluate for me.
Functionally, we prefer the on-grade design. I mean, it really works better. There will be a lot of acrobatics to lift this building and do all the things that we showed you earlier. We know we can do it, but we do like the way it's flowing right now.
Part of me thinks that, understanding the use of the vehicles over the future, people taking vehicles home, people using vehicles in the field, and, what it would look like on the site, to me, would be something I'd be interested in. I also think that the future needs of the city are immense. We have no council chambers, no court, no city attorneys, administrative offices. There's a lot of things not in this building that the community needs to be aware of that would drive parking, and parking that would be acting in a different way than this building, where people come, park, work in the building, or take a different vehicle to do their job. These would be a lot of transient trips, court trips, people coming in for permits. So I might be a little shy to make this investment, thinking that the demand for parking might actually be in the next building that gets built, decades from now. Okay, Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah, part of me is thinking about what is the intent of this idea. And if the intent is to provide covered parking, or at least less exposed parking than what we have out in front, I wonder whether there's a far less expensive option, such as leaving the building on grade, but having solar panels over the parking spaces, because that front part of the lot gets a lot of sunlight. It's really the orange part of the solar design that you guys had. And it might also enable us to make those chargeable spaces as well, because it gives a source of power right there that could be used for it. So it kind of can serve a couple of purposes of protecting the vehicle and also leveraging some of the energy coming to the site that people would be turning on the air conditioners in their car to burn off if they didn't have the cover over their car.
So just so I'm hearing you correctly, what you're asking us to take a look at is that front parking lot, that's staff parking and public parking, structuring, putting a structure over that, and also solarizing that?
Well, of having a canopy over the spaces. It doesn't need to be a roof structure that people can walk on. It's just something that essentially protects the cars from overheating and also can capture that energy and possibly turn it into electric vehicle charging. I think it would cost a lot less than lifting the whole building. So there's another option.
What we can probably bring back is some information on just square footage cost estimate. So what we would anticipate something like that would add to the project in terms of cost based on a relatively simple, my words, not the architect's words, square footage analysis. We'll add that to our list.
It might be something also that we don't cover the whole parking lot. It might be that, half of it or some fraction of it to figure out what is cost effective.
Sure.
All right, do I see a hand? Councilmember Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I just kind of want to say that when we were talking about building a structure on the Tully's property, I remember discussions about the cost per space of underground parking, and it's pretty breathtaking, honestly. And I think I said earlier, and I'll stick by this, I'm in favor of as much covered parking as we can afford, not on an unlimited basis. So I don't think lifting the building is probably a non-starter for me. I don't know if more information comes out. And I don't have enough information to know whether I would, support Ted's proposal or not, but I get that a roofed structure with no walls would be a lot cheaper and maybe provide some of those benefits.
Thank you.
And just for clarity, Ted, I think I'm hearing build a roof with solar panels, not build a roof to put solar panels on. Is that your idea?
Yeah, actually, I was using the word canopy to imply that it's not really a roof. It's just something for the solar panel only. So I've seen structures like this that are not a continuous roof, but are just solar. I've seen some that are a roof with a solar panel, but it doesn't need to be something that connects over the entire lot. The spaces, like the drive space between the cars doesn't have to be covered.
Okay, so you get the picture. Councilmember Reynolds?
Yeah, I share a concern about cost of the structured parking, and I think Councilmember Weinberg has a good idea that I suspect it would be much cheaper to build the other thing. But when you do the analysis, I think you should consider, well, we have a lot of space here. It's not unlimited space, and it strikes me that if we do get that parking moved underground, it makes that front parcel all the more valuable and for potential sale as a multifamily housing site or something like that. And so I think you should consider the increase in value of the unused space when you consider the cost as well, and there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, but just on balance, I would say if it's multifamily housing and you have a 9 to 5 municipal operation, the opportunity for shared parking is extremely high. Those folks tend to leave. Now those spots are all empty. So I agree.
Worthy of analysis as well, yes.
A lot of opportunity there. All right, anything else, council?
All right, let me bring it home then. In your packets and the next few slides are labeled appendix, and we're not gonna go over these today. These are your floor plans, your more detailed floor plans with labels. My caveat as you're looking at these is these are going to change. We will be meeting with the staff. I fully anticipate things will move around between now and the next time we come see you based on their feedback. But we wanted to give you a chance to look at all of those. And then I'm gonna have Aaron drive the slides for me. If you could flip forward to the cost estimate. Yep, next slide, please. This is gonna be very quick, and then we need to get to the water supply pipeline presentation. So, council, we knew that we were gonna be cutting it close on getting that preliminary cost estimate to you, so thank you for your patience. We amended your council packets yesterday. I think I emailed you Friday with the ballpark number. So what we have is a preliminary cost estimate it's based on the information we just shared, which is not a complete design yet. It's a concept drawing. And I won't get into any more detail about the cost estimating. If you have questions on that, we can talk after the meeting or at your next check-in meeting. Next slide, please. So the preliminary cost estimate for the PSM facility, not including the options that we just walked through in detail, is 105 to 110 million. That's a big number. It catches our breath. It's the first time in, I think, city history we've contemplated a facility of this magnitude. So we're aware of that. That number right now, I'm gonna say it again, is preliminary. It includes your construction costs, soft costs, and escalation factor, and state and local sales tax. The escalation factor is based on the information we know today. It anticipates construction start date at the end of 2026. If you looked at the Q&A matrix, Councilmember Jacobson was pulling on an important thread, construction phasing. That still has to be looked at in detail. What we're worried about with construction phasing, because we have teams operating on the site that need to continue operating, is that construction project becomes, instead of a 3-year project or a 2-year project, becomes a 4 or 5-year project. So these are all the things that need to be discussed during design, particularly if we pursue GCCM, which is alternative construction methods. We'll talk about that in a couple meetings. That could help immensely with some of these challenges. All right, next slide, please. Again, we're a little short on time. I think we should reserve the detailed conversation about the cost estimate for our next meeting. But you can start to see where the cost categories are for this facility. And when I use the word facility, I mean all of the components, the buildings, the yard. You can see the breakdown of soft costs. And I've been around for long enough to know that you have to include sales tax because it's a big number. And when it's left out, that's a pretty big mistake. All right, next slide. Councils, we continue to work with you over the next several months. We will do another update to this number, but not until we're further along with the design. There's just not enough benefit to continuing to revise these numbers monthly. You can anticipate by the time we are in front of you in May and June, and this design has evolved further, that we'll have another update. We will have dug further into the alternatives that we shared early and the future list of alternatives as well. Value engineering is my last slide. Councilmember Jacobson stole my thunder. Thank you. We've had, I think, an exciting meeting today, previewing a future facility that will be just so important for this facility, for the city and our future. But it's expensive. And so part of our process, both now and as we get into more detailed design, will be identifying cost drivers, looking at alternatives, and making decisions about where there might be trade-offs. Again, not getting into that today, but it's important that you understand that we see both sides of this, and we also know that we are going to need voter support for this facility. So with that, our presentation is concluded. If you have some questions about costs, we can take that now. I do have a homework assignment. Council members, I do endeavor to meet with you monthly at our check-in meetings. I would greatly benefit from you taking a look at the 5 design strategies, I think is what we called them, and letting me know if you had anything you'd like to add to that list so that we can bring that back for discussion. And then certainly I'm available if you have any additional questions or things you want to discuss between now and our next meeting. And that is all we have, but we are happy to take additional questions if you have any.
Okay, Councilmember Jacobson.
I previously said I had a number of questions, and I'll try to consolidate them into just having I guess, a placeholder, and that is, I've noticed the number for phasing, and obviously to do all of this project, we have to do some things, and I'm operating on several assumptions. Number one is we're gonna have to relocate the police building, and we're probably gonna have to relocate that in the area where our current city hall is. And I'm wondering if we ease some of the phasing pain, maybe not all of it, by separating out the demolition of the city hall and associated grading in a separate contract that we could get busy with now, and then move the police structure into that area on our own time or at leisure, if you want to think of it that way, which would, I think, to some degree, potentially fast-track this project, because, and I want to say that I think the design work you guys have done at Northwest Studios is terrific, and I'm very impressed with it. But I think one of these pieces of paper says we might start construction Q4 or Q2 of 2026, and I think that's possible, but we're going to have to go like, quick like a bunny to be able to get that done. And so I think for both cost reasons and other considerations, we think about maybe putting the demolition of the existing city hall and the relocation of the police facility into a separate contract. That also has the potential advantage, if we contract for the demolition ourselves, is to eliminate double markups. Because a GCCM is gonna mark up the demo sub. If we just have a demo and dispose thing, a contract with the city, that's roughly 10% of that cost, plus minus, is money we're not gonna spend. And we may be able to figure out better ways or ways of enhancing those savings. And also the dislocation of the chief's people, be able to do that, quote, at leisure, if that's even possible, but it's gonna take probably a month or two to move those buildings at best deal. So I have a series of other questions, but some of my colleagues and I probably wanna go out in the hall and use the facilities here, so I'll shut up.
Okay, Councilmember Weicker.
First, I want to thank you guys for being here today, and Robbie for all your work for the last year and supporting Jessie and all of this with everything else she's been doing. And a big shout out and thank you to our staff, I think most of whom are online, because you've been working in old buildings and no buildings at all, and now portable buildings for our most essential service, besides everyone else who does everything essential around here. So I think the time is right. I think this is a great plan to take to our community. I think these alternatives are interesting levers to think about. But first and foremost, we haven't done any infrastructure around our buildings for 40 or 70 years, depending on when you start counting. So I think it's high time we get there, and I hope our council colleagues will help us sell this to our community, because we can't wait. And Q4 2026 already feels too late. So I'm all in. Let's go. Let's do some community engagement. Let's get this building up so our folks can come back to work in an office worthy of all the important critical work they do for our community.
All right, with that, should we be in recess for 10 minutes? All right, we'll be in recess for 10 minutes.
Tight ship he runs.
All right, welcome back to the 2025 City Council Annual Planning Session. We are returning from an 11-minute recess. The time is now 3:13 p.m. And I will be turning the meeting over to Deputy Mayor David Rosenbaum, who will take it from here.
All right, thank you, Mayor Neese. Our next item of business is AB 6605, update on the water supply line project. And it is my pleasure to welcome Chief of Operations Jason Kittner. Take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Jason Kittner, Chief of Operations. I believe Elaine Sommergren is in the room and is going to run the PowerPoint for us, as long as Kelly Hilde, both Deputy Public Works Directors. Online, we have Elaine Gruber, Utilities Engineer, Ellen Hunter, our Operations Manager, and then a number of other staff and our representative from OAC. So with that, Elaine, if you could go ahead and start sharing the PowerPoint, that would be fantastic. He gets things squared away. I'll just quickly go over, we have, I don't know, 10 or 11 slides here today to talk about, to provide an update on the water supply project, including some background, the new water supply alternative location, as well as the additional project background. We'll talk about the alternative service delivery, and then finish and conclude with some next steps and some council questions and discussion as we lead into our conversations with Seattle Public Utilities. Maybe skip to the third slide if you can. All right, perfect. So I'll remind the council and the community that over the course of the last 2 summers or springs, we've had multiple emergencies within the water system. Both happened in the month of April, began the month of April. Completely unrelated, but both impacted the existing water supply line that the city receives from Seattle Public Utilities. After the first emergency in 2023, the city undertook, we partnered with Confluence Engineering and began an evaluation of developing an action plan to build resiliency and reliability within our water system. That work was well underway in 2024 before it sort of took a backseat to the current or the previous water emergency in 2024 on the existing supply line. However, we're happy to report that we will actually be back in front of the utility board next week to talk about that draft action plan and some of the projects that are coming out of that resiliency and reliability work that was scheduled in 2023 and is moving forward. One of the early action items that we'll talk about in the near future is the expansion of our existing well capacity. One of the benefits that we now have within our community is following the water advisory in 2014, we completed the installation of the booster chlorination system at the reservoir facility. And so our current immediate action plan item that we're looking at is expanding our current well rights to not only treat that well water, but expand the use and possibly have additional potable water on the island. So it's very, very early, but we are actively working on that and a number of other action plan items that we will be talking with the utility board and the council in the coming months. Next slide. So last April, as you all are fully aware of, there was a leak on April 3rd on the existing 24-inch Seattle Public Utility line. So in front of you is this map. This is Exhibit to your agenda bill. And this is the existing water supply system to the city. So again, I'll remind the council and community that we are a direct customer of Seattle Public Utilities. We are solely dependent upon water provided by Seattle Public Utilities. It comes across the bridge in that 16-inch purple line that you see in the middle of the screen and ties into the city system at the boat launch facility, where you see that 16 and then 24 numbers there on the screen. At that point, the Seattle Public Utilities line, the existing line, runs down to 40th and up 40th, down 92nd, southeast, and then southeast 43rd, and feeds into our two 4 million gallon reservoir facility, the tanks at Rotary Park. At the boat launch is where our canyon line also ties in, and that's the city system. That's that 16-inch blue line that you see runs down East Mercer Way. In April of last year, the leak happened on the SPU system, which is the 24-inch line on Southeast 40th. I'll remind the council and the community that this leak happened in a location that was inaccessible for equipment, steep slope, power lines above, high pressure and low pressure gas lines surrounding it. Made it very, very difficult to do a conventional repair, where conventional repairs where we dig down to the pipe, excavate, expose it, either cut the pipe and replace it, or put a band on it. It wasn't possible in this scenario given the location. So they actually slip lined that pipe, as we're all aware of, and restored service through the 24-inch SPU line. I will say that is our predominant use. That's how the city is operated predominantly, is through that 24-inch line to the reservoir facility. And I think it's also important to note there where that yellow line touches the purple on this map is where the tie-in to Shorewood system comes into play. Thank you, Elaine. Perfect. The cursor is pointing at it. Shorewood is also a direct customer of Seattle Public Utilities. So in terms of Seattle Public Utilities contract, there are two segments of Seattle Public Utilities pipes. Segment 3 is a shared pipe between the Shorewood system of Seattle Public Utilities and the city, where the city is 97.2% responsible for the operation and maintenance and capital reinvestment. Section 4, or segment 4, runs down 92nd and 43rd to the reservoir facility. That is 100% cost attributed to the city. It is owned and maintained by Seattle Public Utilities, but it is paid for by the city through our rates. Next slide, please. So following that event last year where we restored service, the city quickly began to look at alternative supply line delivery, where we could realign the pipe and get it out of a challenging location to where it's accessible, replace the pipe so it's new. It's obviously, existing pipe is quite old. It's had a number of leaks on it historically. So the city began looking at how we can modify or improve this supply line. And we came across a alternative that works, which runs from, you have a smaller map on the left, but the condensed version is the bigger piece. So what would happen is the city would build a new supply line at the boat launch, and we would cross over the washout right away, run along Southeast 36th Street and up Gallagher Hill to the 40th and Gallagher intersection, and then head east and tie in right there at the intersection that Elaine is pointing at, where the existing segment 3 ends. Under this alignment, Shorewood would be proposed to be connected permanently into the city system at two new pipe locations on near Southeast 36th. When this work was projected last year, began to be talked about, the city quickly aligned the rest of our capital work along this section of roadway to align with the construction schedule of a possible water supply line. So this project, although it's predominantly a water supply line replacement project or installation project, it includes a number of other elements, including the replacement of existing AC pipe or asbestos cement pipe along Gallagher Hill. It includes the new curb and gutter and sidewalk along Gallagher Hill, repaving the roadways along Southeast 36th and Gallagher, and improvements along Southeast 40th as well. So although it's a water supply line predominantly, it includes a number of other elements at once during a construction schedule, which helps with our order of magnitude and identifying, trying to streamline some of the construction costs. It also provides additional quality control for the city in terms of working with a contractor for this specific project. Next slide. The other piece of this project is segment 4, we refer to as segment 4, which is the red line here you see. This is segment 4, which again is currently owned by Seattle Public Utilities. It is 100% the cost responsibility of the city per the SPU contract. So one of the elements and one of the discussion points that we need to talk about today is, although if the city does move forward with building this new supply line, this segment, this red line that you see on the screen, is still currently Seattle Public Utilities ownership. It's their asset, even though the city pays for it. The staff recommend, the design team recommends that we move forward with transferring the ownership of that asset to the city, but that is a consideration for the council and a discussion point for later today. Additionally, you'll see there on the bottom left-hand side, we do have an upsize of a 12-inch water main to the 24-inch that's proposed at this intersection to help with our hydraulic modeling and pressures associated with this project. Next slide. So Shorewood, there are a couple options for the Shorewood apartment connection. So currently they're existing wholesale customer to Seattle Public Utilities because they are fed off the existing SPU supply line or transmission line that runs along Southeast 40th. The staff and the design team recommend that Shorewood be permanently intertied to the city's system along that Southeast 36 alignment that you can see as number 2 there in this drawing. And primarily the driver for that is if we do connect Shorewood apartments to the city system, it allows the complete abandonment of the existing SPU supply line. There's a rhyme and a reason for the city pursuing an alternative supply line, and keeping this pipe in operation prevents a set of challenges and risks that are something that should be carefully considered. However, keeping a pipe in backup to supply additional supply to the city provides its own and presents its own set of challenges in terms of maintaining proper disinfectant, quality of water. There's a number of things and factors that have to be considered. That pipe would not be completely dormant if it sat there in impossible use. So another consideration and discussion point is the long-term connection for Shorewood, and also what should be done with that existing SPU supply line. Next slide. So as I've talked about, this project is pretty complex. It involves multiple agencies, including the city, Seattle Public Utilities, WashDOT. It includes many different types of work and disciplines of work. And so with that in mind, a number of different delivery methods were considered for this project, including what the city is most familiar with, which is your typical design, bid, build process. However, the city is pursuing an alternative service delivery for this project, and actually presented our proposal to the Washington Project Review Committee in December and was unanimously approved for this alternative service project, which is a heavy civil GCCM project. And the reasons for it were because of, one, our tight time schedule to get this work done, the challenges and coordination that's going to be required to coordinate across multiple agencies or entities. By doing the alternative service delivery, the contractor is selected through a competitive process, but they're involved early in the design process. They're involved, well, in this particular case, they're going to be involved before 30% design is complete. So they can actually help with fine-tuning the construction schedule, working through some of the challenges associated with the conflicts that you have between design and engineering and actual construction activities that take place. There's additional benefits in terms of the GCCM self-performance, provides additional collaboration and flexibility across the team, and minimizes our risk in terms of the city's risk in terms of getting this work done within the time frame and on schedule and on budget. Next slide. So our next steps are, as I mentioned, we are going to be in front of the council and the utility board at a number of different points, likely quarterly over the course of 25 and 26. We have selected a design team or an engineer of record for this project. We are currently finalizing that scope of work and contract with that design team. And we are also currently out to bid for, or we're actually currently out to our procurement for the GCCM as well. Likely we'll have a contractor on board in the next couple of months. Once that team is fully finalized, we'll return to the council with those updated milestones and a more realistic picture and timeframe associated with the work that's in store for us along this important project. So as referenced in the presentation today, we sort of 3 questions that teed up for council discussion. Again, these are going to be used for the city's discussions with SPU in terms of what to be done, what to do with the infrastructure and how to move forward in terms of working through that contract amendment, which ultimately will come back to the council for discussion, authorization, and approval. So those three questions are, should the city pursue a permanent connection with Shorewood Apartments? Should the existing 24-inch supply line remain in service? And then should the city pursue the transfer ownership for the remaining segment 4 of the SPU pipeline? And how you talk about those in greater detail, but those are the three questions that we've teed up for today for the council discussion. And again, we have a number of staff members here to help answer questions along the way. We can pull the maps and talk about things in greater detail as needed. So with that, we'll pause there and perhaps stop sharing the screen and ask questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Weicker.
Jason, can you tell us what the Shorewood apartment owners are saying, if anything?
We've just had some preliminary conversations with them. They know that this is moving forward. In terms of hydraulic modeling impacts to Shorewood, we don't anticipate in terms of any changes in volume or pressures or anything like that from their system operation. I haven't done the fine details in terms of what the cost difference may or may not be between Seattle Public Utilities and the city, but that'll be something that we certainly talk to them about, make sure they're aware of as well.
Councilmember Weinberg.
So I assume that the money that we raised to do this project is going to be paid for with utility bills over decades. And so therefore, everyone on the island is going to be paying their fair share of this. And I guess similar to the question that I think Councilmember Weicker was asking a moment ago, I'm wondering if the impact that the residents of Shorewood would see on their water bills would be the same as what everyone else on the island would see, or would it be larger because are they currently getting their bills directly from SPU and not from the city of Mercer Island? And I'd be interested to know if SPU actually charges them more than we do or less, and therefore would they see a less of an impact than the other members of the island would?
Great question. That's definitely analysis that we can work through with Seattle Public Utilities in terms of what that looks like in terms of the overall impact. Getting to the financing question, so we did plan for this project in our capital program. It is funded through the rates. I will say the bulk of the project is currently funded through the water utility because it is mostly water work. However, the other elements, the street-related work, those are all paid for and funded out of the street fund. And then I'll put the asterisk next to it that we also are pursuing some additional funding sources. So we have a request, we're putting a request into the state legislature for some additional funding. We will look at public works trust loans. We will also look at additional bonding opportunities. That's something that the finance director, Matt Mordick, and I are continuously talking about on a regular basis and thinking about our timing and when the project aligns and what financing mechanisms may be available to the city to pursue.
Thank you.
Ernest.
Jason, quick operational question. When we have a water main break, you can have a 10-inch line or something, 6-inch line blow, we have a significant amount of water discharge, and you have folks on the island, equipped to go out and immediately deal with that. If something happens on the supply side of Shorewood like that, do they have 10-inch lines, 8-inch lines running around their property, and how are they equipped to deal with that?
So that is a great question. Alan, if you're on the screen, I'm going to ask you to jump on as well. So I will say so I'll take the first part. Alan, please feel free to add in. So on the Shorewood system, on the Shorewood side, yes, it is their responsibility. They do have water mains that are their responsibility. I will tell you, in my experience with Shorewood, oftentimes Seattle Public Utilities has come in and helped with some of the things that happens. If it's perhaps a piece of the infrastructure that's actually Seattle Public Utilities, they're the ones that actually perform the repair. However, it's completely private. It would be Shorewood's responsibility, just like a resident would do. So general plumber, things like that. I don't know what their staffing level is for their complex. However, I can tell you that when things do happen, especially with Seattle Public Utilities, that is when other emergency interties have been created with the city. So that's often when they come to us and say, hey, can you give us an emergency supply because we're dealing with X, Y, and Z. And we've done that in the past. It's been relatively, it's improved in terms of the efficiency in getting it done in a short order, and opening lines of communication between the agencies has improved over time. So And I will say we haven't seen a big impact in terms of our system operation when that happens. So sort of twofold, right? So if it's, I guess your answer is, if it's a Seattle Public Utility piece, then they've been the ones that have performed the repair. If it's 100% completely private, then it's handled by the private apartment complex.
When we have to intertie, how are you dealing with the metering and the charging of the water?
Great question. Alan, I'm gonna let you talk to him about how we track that and meter it.
Yeah, so we do the intertie, we jump between two hydrants within our section, within our system. As far as metering those, so we include hydrant meters that we charge them as far as the amount of water that we use. And then we work with utility billing to have utility billing bill SPU for the charge of water that Sherwood is using.
Okay, so then they don't pick up a piece of the utility tax from Mercer Island, they're just bypassing, the intertie is just supplying SPU rated water to them.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
All right.
Councilor Reynolds.
Just remind me of curse of the sign. What's the history? Why is Sherwood on its own line? Why weren't they always part of this?
That is a great question. I don't have the exact answer. Perhaps Patrick, you may know the answer off the top of your head, but it has to do with the way the infrastructure was built early on, and then what was transferred ownership-wise. I can tell you that when I took over as the director in 2015, one of the first conversations I had with the Seattle Public Utilities was transferring ownership and responsibility of the Sherwood Apartments to the city. At that time, it didn't make a lot of sense to do that, but things have changed since then. So, Patrick, I see you jumped on the screen. Do you have any additional history as to why Sherwood, other than it's just the way the systems were built?
Yeah, I don't know either. I think that is just the way the systems were built, and I believe Sherwood is the only non-municipal direct customer with SPU.
So as far as we know, whatever reasons did apply, don't apply anymore. Because at least, maybe for no other reason, because we don't know what they were. Okay, thank you.
Maybe we'll find out what they are.
Yeah, as soon as we do it.
Councilor Jacobson.
Are the Sherwood 676 units of Sherwood water, is that individually metered? Or do we know?
I will have to get back to you. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because it seems to me that complicates somewhat some of the downstream
That's
questions.
definitely part of the due diligence in terms of, and tying back to the rate conversation too, right? So what would be the rate impact? Is it hitting the complex as a whole, or is it hitting individual residents within that complex?
Okay, Jason, I want to make sure we are getting you the information that you are looking for from the council. So do you want to take these questions one by one? And maybe you could remind us of your recommendation or the staff recommendation for one by one.
Do you want to jump back on the screen for us real quick?
Jason, it's going to be a minute for her to load that.
So I'll ask the first question. So the first question is, should the Sherwood Apartments be permanently intertied to the city system? The staff's recommendation, the design team's recommendation is that they should. The reasons for that are, one, we've had them as an emergency intertie under some pretty challenging, significant operational situations for us, and have not seen a negative impact from that system impacting our distribution system. Our hydraulic model says that we can support them. And there becomes additional complexity associated with keeping them as a direct customer of SPU. Keeping that existing 24-inch supply line that Seattle Public Utilities has in play is, it's problematic in terms of making sure that water remains fresh and the quality and standards are continuing to be met. And it's not allowing us to completely abandon that existing pipeline. So staff's recommendation for the first question is, should the city pursue a permanent connection with Sherwood Apartments? The answer is, that's our recommendation, is that we should. And also by completing this work, it also eliminates a section of AC pipe out of the system, and that's a priority for the city right now, is to abandon that AC pipe and replace it with newer pipe. So that's the first question.
All right, well, I'll stop you
Pause
there.
there.
Any questions, or are folks ready to give a thumbs up to that recommendation?
I have one comment.
Okay, Jake.
I'd like to see the costs and benefits of that before I vote.
Okay.
And I'll preface it, let me make sure I preface this too, that this is just from obviously the cost benefits will be a component of it. This is for the staff to go back and have a starting discussion with SPU in terms of our contract amendment, right? So this isn't where we're actually gonna end up, but this is where we wanna see us start from our discussion point in terms of what the city's interests are and how we move forward with that contract amendment.
That's my
So I heard cost benefits.
That component's in the calculus when we get there.
Yep, we can do that.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Councilmember Reynolds.
I want to make sure I understood. Right now, we're collecting no revenue from Shorewood for the city of Mercer Island, correct?
Correct.
So-
It goes to Seattle Public Utilities.
So there is some advantage to hooking them up, that if they start paying Mercer Island utility tax, they start sharing part of the cost that the rest of us are covering right now for operating the water system. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so Jason, do you have what you need here?
I got question number one. So question two then is, assuming Shorewood Apartments becomes a direct customer of the city, what should happen to that remaining 24-inch supply line? Should it remain in service because it does provide as an emergency backup to the city? Or should we look to abandon that pipe altogether and be 100% reliant upon the new water supply line that's gonna run up 36 in Gallagher Hill? Staff's recommendation for this question is that the 24-inch supply line should be decommissioned once the new water supply line is up and operational. Again, there's a number of water quality challenges associated with keeping this line in operation, as well as the topography, the inaccessibility, just the location, the challenges and the history of the existing supply line are all factors the staff and the design team are taking into consideration for this particular question.
And Jason, just to clarify on that, would the canyon line remain as the backup if the 40th were to be decommissioned?
Correct. The canyon line, the city owns the canyon line, that 16-inch line that runs down East Mercer Way. That will still be in continued operation and will not be abandoned. It's just the existing 24-inch Seattle Public Utility line that would be abandoned.
Okay, Councilmember Anderall.
Thanks. Turned it off. Okay, so I tend to agree with decommissioning the 24-inch line, but the way question number one is phrased is confusing to me based on a couple of things you said, Jason. Oh, would Shorewood Apartments become a direct customer of ours in the sense that our responsibility for their system ends where we connect with them? Or would we be responsible for maintenance of their system?
Good question. Shorewood would become a direct customer of the city. So part one is, yes, they become a direct customer of the city's utility. Part two to your question is that point of connection to Shorewood, the city would be responsible, just like in a residential property, the city would be responsible up to that meter, and then everything behind that meter or that point of connection to Shorewood would still remain Shorewood's responsibility for maintenance and operation. So the city would own our infrastructure, we'd maintain and operate our infrastructure up to that point of connection for Shorewood. Shorewood Apartments would be responsible for everything behind that.
So
that make
basically,
sense?
we would just be taking the place of Seattle Public Utilities in the
Correct.
contractual arrangement? Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Councilmember Weinberg.
So I'm supportive of decommissioning the pipe. I think that was kind of our primary purpose here, was we've got a pipe going through a ravine that's moving a centimeter per year, and it's just gonna fail again, as the decades go forward. I think having it there as a backup, it would be nice if it weren't in a gradual landslide area. So I'm definitely supportive of decommissioning it.
All right, should we do it? No, Councilmember Reynolds.
I think a lot about resiliency, and I want to make sure I understand what we're talking about here. The 16-inch line that we have right now, the canyon line, water is flowing through there? It's not just in reserve, right? Oh,
It's
here.
predominantly, it's yes and no. So operationally, years ago, both lines were used routinely. However, the canyon line now is primarily used as more of a backup line for our normal operations. Can it be run, can it be used regularly on a routine basis? Yes. And that's how over the course of this last submersion. That's how it was used. We do operate it, we do maintain it, we do understand the elements of keeping that operational, and that's part of our routine daily work that we do. However, we see better results from running our primary water supply through the 24-inch pipe to the reservoir facility rather than the 16-inch. And there's a number of different factors that go into play in terms of hydraulics, water quality, residual chlorine levels and things like that. And so it's a complicated answer, but the answer is yes, the canyon line will still remain operational. It will still have water that flows through it. Will it be on a routine, regular basis? No, it will likely be at key points throughout the course of the year based off our operational demands, based off the seasonality and the weather that goes to it, because that's what impacts some of our water quality elements. But that's, so the short answer is yes, but it's more complex than that.
But, so I want to make sure I understand. So you could practically kind of just completely shut it off periodically and then once every 3 months turn it back on and not sacrifice water quality?
Yes, but we do preventative measures and do things along the way to make sure that we are not impacting water quality with that. So the answer is yes, we do not operate that canyon line on a regular routine basis at certain points throughout the course of the year, but we're maintaining it along the way.
And the other line, the 24-inch line right now that it's got the sleeve that's been pulled through it, what is its capacity as compared to the 16-inch line?
It's fairly similar. It's slightly better capacity, slightly better. That 24-inch pipe has a sleeve in it that's like 17 inches and change, and so it's slightly better than the 16-inch line. But the 24 that's being proposed for the new supply line is markedly better.
So if we're comparing the two as options for a backup line, the 24 that's really a 17 or the 16, they're pretty close to each other, but the 24 that's really 17 is much more unreliable because of the slope and the construction and everything else, right?
Correct.
Okay, that seems like a no-brainer then to me to decommission that line.
All right, thumbs up on that. All right, you got 7, Jason. All right, next question.
Okay, so the last piece is that, and Elaine, maybe I'll have you go back to that slide that shows segment 4. So with the construction of the new supply line that comes to the top of Gallagher, one more slide back, I think. Yep, there you go. So this, oh, you're right there. No, go back one more slide. Perfect, thank you. So the red line that you see here on this map is currently what they consider segment 4 in our contract with Seattle Public Utilities. This segment of pipe is currently owned and operated by Seattle Public Utilities. So as the city builds a new supply line, which is the orange line at the top there, you see where it connects into the red. That red section is still currently owned and operated by Seattle Public Utilities. So ownership, the way water would come onto the line at the boat ramp, it would go into the city system, back into the Seattle Public Utilities system, and into the city's reservoir tanks. It's a little quirky. It's not insurmountable, but it's a little quirky. And so the staff's recommendation is that the city look to take and transfer the ownership of those assets from Seattle Public Utilities, so this segment, this red line here, from Seattle Public Utilities to the city. With that is understanding the age and condition of pipe, the costs associated to it, what's been set aside for replacement of this pipe, what are the ongoing operational maintenance costs on an annual basis, understanding that cost benefit analysis associated with this transfer of ownership of this asset. However, from a practicality standpoint, if the city does take ownership of this pipe, then the Seattle Public Utility ownership would stop at the boat ramp, and there would be no other ownership on the island. So anything that, any major infrastructure, any major issue that happens is responsibility and maintenance is performed by city staff. So staff's recommendation is to pursue the ownership and transfer of ownership of this asset to the city as part of this project.
I have a question.
Does council concur?
And this may sound like a flippant question, but it's not really. Would we be paying them or are they paying us?
Yes, that's my question too.
That is part of the conversation that we get to have with Seattle Public Utilities. To be determined.
Okay. It depends on how old it is and how much work it needs, and we're either buying a junker or that's worth restoring, or we're buying a valuable asset that we have to pay for.
Correct, and I'll remind the council that this segment in particular, segment 4, is 100% owned by Seattle Public Utilities, but paid for 100% by the city. So we're paying for it no matter what.
Oh, okay. Well, that kind of shifts me toward consolidating ownership of the facilities under the city.
Mayor Neese.
Jason, I want to clarify a remark you made. Sounds like over the operational life of that pipe, we've been paying towards the sinking of that pipe, right? Some sort of funding to replace it. So if they turn it over operationally to us, are we getting that? Are we getting that back?
That is one of the differences between city finances and Seattle Public Utility finances and capital finances. So Seattle Public financing for capital reinvestment, they have a different rate structure and they fund that project differently. So, and this is getting the answer to that question is part of our conversations with SPU, but my understanding is that they don't actually pay for the cost of that pipe to be replaced until the pipe is actually replaced. So they're not building they're not building a sinking fund along the way to pay for that pipe. Now, that's part of the due diligence that we'll do as part of this work to make sure. And if there is a sinking fund associated to it, I do think that we absolutely should be getting that back as part of this.
And so explain to me the other part of the drawing that says upgrade to 24-inch pipe. I mean, if we're going to run a 24-inch pipe up Gallagher, why would we want a 12-inch being the interconnect to the reservoir? Or am I missing?
So that 12 is it's currently a 12-inch and it's being upgraded to a 24.
So do we care? So then couldn't we just abandon that pipe? I mean,
No, because the pipe still has to come from, that red segment on that map, the water still flows through that pipe to the reservoir facility.
I must be missing something. If we're gonna upgrade Gallagher Hill to a 24-inch pipe and run it all the way to the reservoir, and there's a little SPU leg in the middle, are service lines on that or something?
Elaine Gruber, are you here?
Yeah, she's here. She's pulling something up.
Elaine, so if you can answer that question as to why we're actually tying back into the Seattle Public Utilities system at that intersection, correct?
Right, so the new Gallagher line won't go all the way to the reservoir. It connects in with that red segment that they're talking about transferring ownership. So the orange is the new Gallagher, the new 24-inch transmission line we're talking about building that's gonna go up Gallagher to that intersection right there. And then it's gonna flow through the red, which is the existing SPU, down to that brown dot. And so at that brown dot, there's currently, our current flow goes through a 12-inch pipe that it actually is causing a lot of hydraulic loss. So while we're doing this project, we want to upsize that intersection to get a 24 because it will improve the hydraulics of the system. But all of that will continue to be in service even with the new transmission line.
Well, Mayor Neese, to your.
I see. So there's only an upsize at an intersection. There's not an upsize of the full pipe.
I think that's
That's
the
what's confusing me.
clarification we're looking for.
Correct.
The red pipe,
Correct.
what is the size of the red?
Oh, it's the brown dot, not the.
Yeah, it's just that dot that gets
Yeah.
upsized to 24-inch.
Yeah, the red is already 24. For some reason, when everything was built, there was like 100 feet of 12-inch left at that intersection that we found when
Okay.
we were doing some hydraulic modeling. And so we just need to upsize it because it's causing significant loss in the system. So while we're out there, we just want to fix that, and it's going to just improve the hydraulics of the system.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Councilman Weinberg.
So the pipe that's highlighted in red on the diagrams on our screen, how old is that? Was it put in like 5 years ago, 50 years ago?
I believe it was in the 50s.
I'm sorry, can't quite hear.
Jason, we lost
In
your,
the 50s?
The 1950s?
yeah.
Okay, so it's near end of life, that pipe. And so essentially, it's going to, we're probably buying something that has, maybe 5-10 years of life left on it before it needs replacing. I presume that would be factored into the financial transaction between us and the city of Seattle. I guess one other question would be, if between now and when this pipe gets replaced, there were a water line break along the red segment, Based on what we've seen in the past, would service likely be returned to Mercer Island residents faster if it were owned by Mercer Island or if it were owned by the city, or is it exactly the same because we already own maintaining it?
Well, that's a very complicated question. In terms of ownership of the pipe, by the city owning it and operating and maintaining it, it allows us more control over how that pipe is restored. And so I will tell you, with the previous leak or break on that 24-inch pipe along Southeast 40th, one of the challenges that we faced was coming up with a proposed solution to a complex problem and working with multiple agencies to do it. By taking ownership of this pipe or this asset, it provides the control to the city. So in terms of decision-making, what decisions are made, how it's paid for, those terms of operational controls would be within the city, and so things could be perhaps handled more efficiently than perhaps they were.
Yes.
I'm not saying they were handled poorly back in April, but perhaps you could argue that it would be done more efficiently moving forward.
Yeah, it sounds like there'd be fewer administrative moving parts if it were owned by the city. But we are buying something that is very near end of life, so it's likely going to either need replacement or entropy might beat us to it. So it's something we need to be aware of, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, and the due diligence will be part of this conversation, right? Getting the actual age of the pipe, condition of the pipe, maintenance history of the pipe, what the break history of the pipe is. That will all be something that's done. I will say early in our alignment analysis, we did look at replacing the entire segment of pipe, even this segment to the reservoir facility, but your costs go up pretty substantially. And so, again, it's something that as we identify and look at these assets, and if the city does take ownership of these assets, we can start to plan for the replacement of the assets at the right interval, right? And so we can plan within our 6-year schedule where we have more control over that, how we fund it, and how we construct it. And so that was a large part of the consideration why we didn't recommend replacing the entire segment of pipe all the way to the reservoir facilities, because my recollection of the history of breaks on this line are they're smaller, they're not as frequent, and so perhaps we can extend the useful life of this pipe a bit longer and plan for it more accordingly within our water utility.
Okay, I am aligned with the staff recommendation here. Can we get a thumbs up on that? All right, Jason, you got 7. I think we got through all 3 of your questions, unless you have any more that are secret. All right, with that, I will hand it on over to Mayor Neese.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum. We are on to our last item of regular business of the planning session, which is AB 6606, the 2024 Community Member of the Year. And I will welcome City Clerk Andrea Larson.
Good afternoon, Council. Before you today, you will be making a selection of your 2024 Community Member of the Year. There have been 2 selections I've seen sent into the City Council email box. Another council member mentioned that they might be making a nomination. Depending on the number of nominations that are made, if we get 1, it is appropriate for somebody to make a motion and second it, and that person would be elected the 2024 Community Member of the Year. If there are multiple nominees, the appropriate route would be to do an email vote to select the member, and then we would take a roll call vote once a member is selected, actually naming them. So depending on the number of nominees that are selected, that'll kind of determine the path forward we take. And with that, Mayor Neese, I'll turn it back over to you to ask for nominations.
Okay, so you have 2 nominations already. I'll let you read the names.
The 2 nominations that we've received so far are for Elwood Woody Howes, who is a ham radio operator, and for Jennifer Goodrich, who has done work with the Mercer Island Farmers Market.
Okay, so beyond that, I'll ask if there are any other nominations.
I have a question.
Okay, questions?
Hasn't Woody House been a Citizen of the Year before?
That is a good question. We have it right here in our packet.
Do not believe
I just
so.
read through all 35 of them, and I didn't see his name.
Okay.
But somebody can double-check my work.
Well, I will double check while we still wait for any additional nominations, if there's any. Looks like there won't be any, and It's nice that these names were all placed in bold here, so not seeing Woody in here.
Mr. Mayor, I do not see Woody in the past
Okay.
recipients.
So I am going to close nominations on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. All right, so that's going to get us to an email ballot, is that right?
That is correct.
So if everybody's got some form of device, you'll just be voting probably once on this, so.
Yes, you will select one of the nominees and reply with that person's name. The person who receives the majority would be selected, and then we would do a roll call vote to name them the 2024 Community Member of the Year. I am sending the email now. Thank you, council. The votes have been tallied. Jennifer Goodrich received votes from Councilmember Weinberg, Councilmember Weicker, Councilmember Reynolds, and Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum. Woody House received votes from Mayor Neese and from Councilmember Andral, and Councilmember Jacobson abstained. Mayor Neese, Jennifer Goodrich received 4 votes. Now would be an appropriate time to make a motion to nominate Jennifer Goodrich as the 2024 Community Member of the Year and ask me to call a roll call vote.
Okay, council, is there a motion to select Jennifer Goodrich as the 2024 Community Member of the Year? And have staff invite them to a future council meeting to be recognized. Moved by Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, seconded by Councilmember Weinberg. Any discussion? Not seeing any. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Andral.
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Mayor Neese.
Aye.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
And Councilmember Weicker.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will reach out to Jennifer Goodrich and invite her to a future council meeting.
Thank you. All right, we'll now take a break for dinner, and the February 4 regular hybrid meeting will start at 5 p.m. this evening. The time is now 4 o'clock p.m. As a reminder, council, please stay seated until the city has terminated the broadcast. Good evening, and we'll see you back here in an hour.